Okay.
She's
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June meeting of the Old Zoning Commission. Tonight is June 9th, 2025. At the table, three permanent members to my left, Mary Jo Nozel. We have Michael Fogliano. We have Denise Savaggio. To my right is Michael Peter Barnes, alternate. We have Mary, gosh, I can never get her.
Every time.
Mary Gardner Coppola, or it's Coppola, right? There you go. Our secretary, Jane Marsh, permanent member, Michael Miller, and myself, Paul Orzel. So on our first item of agenda this morning, actually our first two agenda items this evening, continued public business, A and B, old business, none. So we'll move right into agenda item C. Public hearing, it's a special permit, and I'll turn it over to Madam Secretary.
Okay.
What legal notice in there? Oh,
I'm sure it is. I'm just happy.
yes. It's all applications. So
I think it's a separate piece of paper.
there we go.
All right. Zoning Commission of the Town of Old Lyme will hold a public hearing at a regular meeting on Monday, June 9th, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. at Memorial Town Hall in the Meeting Hall, 52 Lime Street, Old Lyme, Connecticut, to consider and hear comments on the following. Special permit 149-D Boston Post Road to allow operation of a licensed pediatric medical practice that will provide outpatient health care services for children. D30 zone, Catherine M. Hamby, MD, applicant. At this hearing, interested parties may be heard and written communications received. Copies of the application are in the Land Use Office, 52 Lime Street, Old Lyme, Connecticut. This is dated at Old Lyme, Connecticut, this 26th day of May, 2025. And it was published in a newspaper, but it doesn't say Lyme.
Okay, we will post New London Day because that's all we've got.
Yeah, one day.
And we do have a copy of the chair sheet upstairs if you want me to go get it. But anyway, it should be good.
So we have the Exhibit A, which is the application itself. Exhibit B is a plan. Exhibit C is the legal notice I just read, and Exhibit D is certificate of mailings.
I know they were there. Yep. Okay.
Okay, take it away.
We are good. All right, the applicants, please come forward and speak with us.
Hi,
Hi,
back again. Do you want to hear about the whole thing again?
we would.
Oh.
Well, I wasn't here last month, so let me
Okay.
defer to yes.
Yes. Okay, so my name is Catherine Camby. I'm a pediatrician. I worked in East Lyme at Flanders Pediatrics for the last 11 years, and I am asking for a permit to open a practice here in Old Lyme. I have the building. So that you can see there is confusion, which we discussed last month about the lot. It's actually 149 Boston Post Road. In the town archives, I think it says 151, but it's actually 149 is the mailing address. It'll be on the second floor. There's an elevator and a rear entrance. The parking lot is in the back, and we'll have 8 parking spots designated specifically for the practice. It is a single practitioner office. That's me. I expect to see between 20 and 25 patients a day in the practice Monday through Friday, with maybe a couple on the weekends for emergency, meaning urgent type visits, but not emergency visits, no urgent care. There won't be a laboratory involved. There will be no emergency care being offered. Basic routine pediatric care, well child visits, sick visits for routine childhood illnesses. there shouldn't be a disruption in any kind of traffic with 20 to 25 patients a day. And I think that's it. And other questions? I mean, it's, yeah, great, thank you.
I'm an old med tech, so yes.
Okay, great.
On the part we had, yes.
Yes.
This was yellow.
Yes,
This was extra.
that's the other side of the building. That's another office space that's not being used currently. The yellow side is
Okay,
mine. That's the 1,800 square feet.
okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
And you said there'd be no labs, I took that off.
There
my
won't be
question.
labs. It would, I mean, it would be simple, like, you know, swabs for flu and
Okay.
COVID and RSV type things, but
Mhm.
nothing. No, there will be no laboratory in the office.
Okay, will you be sending samples out? So
Yes.
Is there enough room for the pickup to come?
So usually what they do is Quest and Lawrence Memorial have a box outside the office on the sidewalk outside the door
Mhm.
that they come in the evening and just do a pickup.
Okay.
So there's plenty of room for, it's usually a little, yeah, little specimen box.
And no x-rays or?
No, no.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
okay. Okay, and then you had said you might sublet in your.
Well, I requested that as part of my lease, because I'm having 4 exam rooms in the office in the case that I
Mhm.
add another provider at some point.
Mhm.
So my thought was maybe I could sublet one room for a lactation consultant or a social worker or a psychologist a couple times if there was somebody that needed to come in and use that space. More lactation consultant was what I had in mind. Yeah, yeah, because new moms need that. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
The elevator in the building, was that existing or was that put in?
It was put in the elevator. When was that put in?
3 years ago, I think it was.
3 years ago.
Okay, and that's under a service contract with an
It hasn't
organ?
paid for itself yet. Hasn't paid for itself yet.
No, you want to know if you have a service contract, is it getting
Oh, yes,
service?
please.
Who's the contract with?
The service elevator company.
Okay,
That did it.
whoever the elevator company is. Okay. That's on maintenance. It's
6 months of month service.
okay,
Not much of service, but not much activity yet, but going down the road.
Right.
There's also alarm, I paid, every source every month. That,
We should ask that you give your name for the record, so we have your name on the tape here. Can you give your name for the,
Jim Graybill, I'm the property owner. So we built this building about 7 or 8 years ago and, I had no activity upstairs. I had a few interested parties, but I wasn't interested in them. So we finally decided to put an elevator in about 3 years ago and I thought for sure we'd find somebody in a hurry, but it took a while and I'm so happy.
Here you go.
Dr. Canby. So, I'm thrilled. Yeah, we still have the other half, the other 1/3 of the upstairs is still available. So maybe you should like to expand in a couple of years.
okay. Other questions by the commission? None. Mary Jo? No?
No?
Okay. All right, if that's the case, then thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I will open it up to public comment. I mean, if we have any comments, we may have to ask.
Oh, yeah.
I open up the public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment on this application? Yes,
Well, Dan, how, I think it's a great idea.
thank you.
Sure. Actually, my question is, why did she have to come for a permit to begin with? Permit to do what?
okay, I'll explain. I explained to the zoning commission last time. The second floor of this building has never been permitted to do anything. And therefore, because it's a brand new use in the building, we need to have some permitting process for that. If anyone wants to go in after this, there's already a permit for the second floor. There was never any permit for the second floor of the building. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So there's no additional questions, then I will ask for a motion from the commission. Thank you. To close the public hearing. So second by Mary Jo. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Abstain. Okay, the public hearing then closes at a 5-0-0. And thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you.
Actually,
Thank
you
you.
haven't voted on the application yet, folks. So you close the public hearing, you have to vote on the.
Right, I know that, yeah.
So You're saying congratulations.
No.
No, congratulations, you have to close the public hearing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's
Okay,
that mean?
so now,
Okay.
so now I will ask the commission, I will ask for a motion that we approve the application, the application for 149D Boston Post Road by Dr. Hamby for the facility. So moved by Mike Miller. Is there a second? Second by Jane Marsh. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Congratulations.
Thank
The application is approved 5-0.
Congratulations to you, sir.
Yeah, you will get a copy of the special permit. It's a unique, after legal notice goes in the paper, we'll get you the special permit. It's gonna have to be recorded on the land records
Okay.
because it runs with the land. So it costs $60 to record it in the land records, but we'll give you a copy of that. And we'll notice published, okay?
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Nice meeting
Nice
you.
meeting you.
Have a good night.
Good night. Okay. Next item on the agenda is receipt of new applications. Item D, petition to amend the Old Lyme zoning regulations, section 5.10.3, special permit uses permitted in the C30 zone. The application by the town of Old Lyme is to cross out text indicating, to cross out the existing text indicating, in quote, retail dealer station for sale of motor vehicle fuels, close quote. Town of Old Lyme applicant again. I'll take a motion that we set the public hearing for this. It's a public.
On July 14th,
July.
2025, yes.
Okay.
That's next to 714.
Hmm?
714.
7/14, it's the second Monday in July. So
That's
14.
our regular meeting.
That's our regular meeting.
That's your regular meeting. Yeah, it's your regular meeting in July. We're setting it down for 6:30, like we're supposed to. July 14th, this building, all the things we usually say. So, okay.
Is there a motion?
I'll move it.
Okay, Jane Marsh's motions. Is there a second?
That's like,
Second by Michael Miller. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, this application then will be heard in the July 14th meeting.
It will be heard by planning this Thursday in case anybody's interested.
All right, other business. Discussion and vote on fees for applicants before the zoning committee.
We can handle this now. We can handle this after the regulations. Again, we do have Francisco Gomes here this evening, so you may want to hear him. You may want to talk about fees first. Up to you guys how you want to handle that.
How do we want to handle that, Commission?
That makes sense.
Makes sense. Okay. All right.
So why don't we move the agenda around so that you're move F to ahead of
Okay.
the discussion of.
All right. I will take a motion then that we move agenda item F before agenda item other business discussion and vote on fees for applicants before the zoning commission.
Should be E, by the way.
E?
It's not the E.
Yeah, I don't know why, I was like looking at that, like, this is interesting.
Somehow the formatting gets screwed up. That's
Okay.
supposed to be E, but
So,
New item E will be commission regulation discussion.
okay, you motioning.
I'm making a-
Second,
Second,
by Mary Jo, all in favor. Aye. Opposed, abstained? Okay. Welcome. Mr. Gomes.
Should I join you at?
Oh, absolutely. This is coming to our table.
Happy to.
for those of you that are looking for hard copies, we have a collection of hard copies down at the end there, if anybody needs them, okay?
anyone else?
Already go.
I'll take what's the CC printed.
My exercise.
Eric, I'll turn this part of the program over to you.
Very briefly, as you guys know, we went out to a contract to revise the regulations. This has been a process sort of in the works for many months now. I've been having Teams or Zoom, like Zoom meetings with Cisco and Paul as we've been going through the draft regulations. You folks have seen at least bits and pieces of them. I brought back to Mr. Gomes your thoughts about what you would like to see for tonight's meeting here. So you now have in the version that we sent out for the red lines here showing the text that's been added here. You have an appendix showing where things were, where things went to. So hopefully you should have a better sense in this version of the regs as to what you're looking at here. And again, you indicated you'd like to have Mr. Gomes here in person, which we have tonight, to ask him questions to sort of go over the process here. So at this point, I'm going to sort of turn it over to Mr. Gomes here to discuss it with you. But I deliberately picked a night where we have very little else going on, so we have as long as we need tonight to go over this and spend the time needed. So, welcome.
Okay. Eric, thank you for the introduction. And for the record, Francisco Gomes with FHI Studio. Unless anyone has thoughts as to how you'd like me to go about this, I think it might be helpful if I just gave you an introduction to how we approach the work and our process. I think you're familiar with our process, but to make sure you understand how we've gone about the work. And then I'm happy to, and this is a summary document, I believe you all have, that outlines the changes that were made. I'm happy to go through that with you and then receive any questions you might have about the new format and any content in it. All right, so with that said, I think as you're all aware, we've been at work now for several months. And I've been meeting on a monthly basis with both Eric and Paul. Our work involves really, we have two phases, right? And we're right now towards the end of the first phase of the work. And we very intentionally designed this process in two phases because in phase one, we really need to establish the regulations as a solid foundation for more substantial work that we might take under consideration in the next phase. And by that, I mean, your zoning regulations have been cobbled together over decades with multiple authors, applicants and their lawyers, staff, commission. And this is very common. And as such, there are errors, omissions, redundancies, inconsistencies, and we don't want to build upon that, right? So we want to pull it apart and put it back together in a way that it really is from one voice, your voice as a commission, and is consistent and solid. It's structurally sound. So that as we move on to the next phase of work, which is to have much larger discussions about land use and regulating land use here in Old Lyme, we have something very solid we can build upon, and then we have a track record of success in moving things forward. I've worked in some communities where we try to do it all at once, and that process suffers a little bit from getting bogged down with some of the big ideological issues. And it's hard to make traction on the mechanical things that really need to be done just to help you better administer the zoning regulations. So that's why they're structured as they are. There's a tremendous amount of work in unpacking 250 plus pages and putting it back together without disrupting the intention of the regulations. We've been very careful in our work not to adversely impact property owners by making changes that they might be unaware of, that the zoning commission had not intended. And so we're very careful in our work to preserve really the substance of the regulations while organizing it into a format that is going to be easier for you to work with. The only change there's one caveat to that is that the state has passed a lot of legislation in the past few years. And of course, you're probably all aware there's some legislation pending that just needs to be signed by the governor that will be impactful to us as well. The state's passed a lot of legislation. Your zoning regulations, like most communities, has not kept up with that. And so there are some things that we have to pull out of the regulations or write differently that really do change what's allowed. By example, minimum dwelling unit sizes. You can't regulate that anymore. So that has to come out. And there's some other aspects I'm happy to walk you through. Other than what's essentially statutorily required that we're compliant with, we are very careful not to intentionally make changes that affect property rights without working with you to agree upon those changes. So if you do in your review, you see something that you feel really changes how things were regulated before, and it was not something intentional by us and that we didn't document it, and the reasons for that, please bring it to our attention. We want to make sure that what we move forward with really has the same substance of what you've been working with, for the past several years.
Will it be somewhat easy to incorporate, for instance, the new House bills with all the new proposed regulations to kind of file in here, or?
Yes. And Eric asked me a similar question last week. We've designed the document itself to be fairly flexible in terms of its organization, where we can add content, remove content, update content, and everything updates automatically, section numbers and cross references and that sort of thing. There are, and I don't want to get too ahead of us in this discussion, because some of the more impactful items are, the effective date would be a little more than a year out, would be July of 2026. But we still need to understand where your authority begins and ends with respect to, by example, allowing residential in your commercial zones, which the state is telling you you're going to need to allow 2 to 9 family. Okay, so we can allow that. We need to better understand, well, what's your authority to regulate that development as it occurs in terms of the property itself and access and all these other things that you normally regulate under a special permit. The state's telling us, well, you have to allow it by right, zoning permit. It doesn't mean you can't regulate it at all. So there's the real work to be done is to understand what you can and cannot do. And I think that's there's going to be a lot of discussion in the planning world and land use law world over the next several months. It's going to help us better understand that.
Mm-hmm.
By example, this Friday, I'll be in Hartford at an American Planning Association land use law session. And this is going to be a major topic, the pending legislation. So I think our timing's good in that we're taking a look at the regulations in their entirety, and we can do a very good job of integrating what the state may be requiring us to accommodate. Okay. All right. So with all that said, I'd like just to walk through the types of revisions that we made and explain a little bit as to why we made these kind of revisions, the purpose.
Could I interrupt? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
please, no, you're not interrupting. We're here to converse.
Well, no, I really want to get to that, but maybe for 5 minutes for those of us who haven't gone through this before. Could you give us just a rundown? You said that these wouldn't be official till 2026, for example. So what is the process from going from here to the public to approval?
And just to clarify, it's House Bill 5002 and the pending legislation.
I'm sorry.
But I'm happy to address your question.
Okay.
So that process can be incredibly simple if you find that the regulations are really not controversial in any respect, right? We have not adversely impacted property rights. We're not substantially changing anything that works. We are just putting this together into a format and organization and amending the content so that you can better administer it. This can be a very straightforward process. I've worked with several communities, And we have, in the course of one public hearing, open the public hearing, receive a handful or no comments, close the public hearing, and that same evening adopted the regulations. And then 15 days later, they became effective. And I just went through that with Manchester, and the regulations are effective on the 9th. And we just had our public hearing 2 weeks ago. So
Let me just skip. Tied to that, Mary Jane, we still would send it to planning because planning needs to make a determination of consistency of the plan of conservation development. We would send it to RiverCog because RiverCog has to review this. We'd have to send it to the state to make sure the state's going to review this as well. So that there are other parties, DEP, RiverCog, other parties will have a chance to review these regs to make sure that they are consistent with their take on the regs. For instance, again, Gateway Commission has to review our new gateway regs to make sure that they still match what Gateway wants. So we'll probably be taking a couple of months of shipping this out to everybody to get their take on it, to make sure they are okay with where we are here before we come back and then vote on the final version of this. So yes, the actual public hearing and adoption, fairly straightforward, but we do need to go to all the players that were involved in this and get their buy-in that this is still consistent with their vision of what's supposed to be in here. So, and that's sort of, again, part two, which we're just talking about, of discussion with stakeholders about what we think the next version is going to be. That's going to be a whole separate issue. But for this version, we still need to go to all the different bodies and say, this is what we're looking at. It shouldn't look any different, but you have to tell us you're happy with the way it looks. So that's going to be part of where we go from here once the commission is relatively happy with the draft.
And I imagine if we make the changes necessary to respond to the state's recent legislation for that, that what we will be hearing is not comments on us as a zoning commission, but public comment on what they think about what was done up in Hartford.
Yes, though, as I was talking with Michael Poliano earlier, it looks like the governor is now saying either he will hold a special session or veto the legislation. So it's unclear, even as of tonight, what that legislation is going to look like. So we're playing against a moving target, and I'm not sure we want to try and do anything too soon before we know where the dust settles on this.
Right.
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
I know one of the things that I was thinking is that I think clean this up, and I know that some of these regulations are, if it got signed,
Right.
taking effect, but fairly quickly. That said, I think that if we're pretty comfortable within this meeting or the next meeting of cleaning these up, I think trying to add some of it, there's a lot of changes. And I think it would be better for us to work with the clean document. So that would be my recommendation. Get the clean version so that we all like, that's done.
Right.
And then even with the new we've got stuff in here that's being changed. That was, the legislation happened years ago. We never integrated it. If we're a few months behind on that, I think it's a better thing to do. And the dust will have settled.
I have a few concerns, or because you hit some important points about
Sure.
property rights unintentionally being changed.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest concern, because the general public needs to know when their bundle of rights that they get with their real estate is going to potentially change. This commission back in 2007 had changed, the zoning regulations that through some sort of modifications. I'm sure you've seen in your edits is the 2007 or 2008 rebate.
Right.
But in the process, a substantial amount of property owners in Old Lyme lost property rights that they were unaware of, as far as the commercial zone being zoned residential. Like they had to rewrote the map, which I'm sure you know.
Mhm.
So my concern is that right down to like the camper language about how many campers you're allowed to have, how many boats how many things in people's land. Because we're a rural community, I feel like I want to make sure that we're looking at those kind of regulations intently, because they affect a lot of people within the community. Like a commercial vehicle at a residence, when a lot of businesses work from home, they have commercial vehicles in this rural area. It's always, a contractor has his stuff at his house.
But that's talking about stuff we might want to change or update.
No, it's not. It's already been modified within this first version, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm reading it correctly. Is there content in here that's been added in the first version in the process?
Yeah,
of cleaning it up?
only to meet state regs.
No, that's not what I'm talking
Well,
about.
we'll get there.
Well,
So
yeah,
let-
we
let's-
can dig into that in more detail. Let's start from the beginning and then we can come back around to that. Yeah.
I have a question about effective dates because zoning regulations, every time they're changed,
Mhm.
there's people who got permits under that version.
Correct.
So when we completely rewrite them, how are we going to maintain a database
Mhm.
of the regulations at every instance in the past?
That's a fantastic question, and it's incredibly important to do so. So here I'm holding the draft of the new organization of your regs, and then here are your old regs. If you move ahead at some point and adopt these, we don't throw these away.
Yeah.
They go on file. This is the historic record that you go back
So will
to.
it just be paper version, is what I'm asking?
No, I mean, first of all,
You have digitally
we
as
have
well.
digital copy of it.
Every
As
single one?
well, okay. On my zoning directory, my Z drive upstairs, I have basically everything from 2008 forward electronically saved. Before that, it's in the town clerk's office. The town clerk's office has every set of the zoning regulations going back to the 1958 or whatever the first version is. So there's that, but also, again, you have the appendix here that shows how things got translated over.
Right, for this version.
For this, well, from this version, from the last version. So basically going from my book over there to this is going to be shown here. So yes, there will need to be some level of transliteration from one to the other. But, you know, there will be people who have regs written under the old regs, and we're going to need to be able to say, oh, well, going from that to this, here's where it is now, but we're still able to look in the old book and say, seeing what it says in your old book, here's what it read at the time of your adoption. So that's going to be important. But it's not the first time it's happened, and we do need to make, we do need to keep track of it going forward.
So is there any way to capture that 1958 to 2008?
Electronically, I mean, there probably is.
You can make PDFs of it.
Yeah, I mean, you can, we have, I mean, Fallon Macquarie is our new wetlands planning clerk. And she's a whiz at sort of the electronic stuff because she's 25 and I'm 59. But she's been able to put a lot of stuff into the Laserfiche that has not previously been in the Laserfiche. So if I told her, go down to the town clerk's office and get all the different regs and put them in the Laserfiche under, historic regs, I'm sure she'd be able to do that. Laserfiche is not easily searchable in the same way that PDF is, but we could also then have her try and do it as PDF. That would probably take a little bit longer. But yeah, it's the sort of project that we can work on and make happen.
Because, that's a feature that I think sometimes gets overlooked in the regulatory process, that people got their permits. This is a developed town now with a beach community that was pretty heavily developed quite early on. And to get those earlier regs so that people are getting their permits under those regs, not under the current regs, is important.
Well, I mean, obviously, if they come in for new permits, they come in with the current regs, but to the extent that whatever permits they got have number references in them, you would be able to then search those number references in that way.
It's something I would sort of like to have as an outcome, was that we'd have something like
Okay, we can certainly work on doing that.
brand spanking new something.
Well-
And I don't want anybody to be able to say that if this is really just an adoption of the old one rehashed, that we're starting all over for everybody, because we're not.
But I think we are. That's my concern. Is I think you're all right. You're talking about the unintended consequences of the changes of this new adoption.
Well, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it from the zoning standpoint, is that we want to know when we're making a new regulation.
Correct.
Because if it's a new regulation, it'll only apply to new applications, not to old applications.
Right. But again, Michael, I think part of what Francisco was saying is if you are finding things in here that are substantively different, We need to know that, and that's important to go forward and sort out why it's different and whether that was intentional or unintentional.
I understand, but I think that information should be supplied to us. I shouldn't have to go through and find the content that they're adding in that might change the
Well,
land
it's in-
use, right?
It's in red, right? I mean,
Great one.
it's in red, so you'll see new language in here in red. And so you should be
So,
able to determine,
So all these other A, B, C, D, none of those words were changed. It's
none of
just-
those words were
it's
changed,
just
only
that-
the red words were changed.
Words were changed for grammar and clarity, but words weren't changed to change what's allowed. Dimensions weren't changed.
Yeah, no, I guess I have that one. I just felt like the way things were explaining here is a lot different than the other regulations, and I'm not seeing that in red.
It is, and it's for clarity. But we were very careful not to change it and to change the meaning. We're very careful about
And
that.
if you do find changed meaning,
I understand.
then we want to address that.
Absolutely.
Because again, I worked with Francisco on, for instance, the issue of the alcohol permits and what would be allowed under the alcohol permits. And we went around a few times making sure that what the new alcohol permits were matched what the existing alcohol permits were. So, yeah, it's like anything else, it's a human endeavor. It's imperfect. So if there's things in here
Yep, I
we're
understand that
happy
part.
with, we will try and get it closer to true so that we get a more faithful adaptation.
That sounds good. I just hope my other commission members know, because I can tell they're visually frustrated by my questioning. But this is a bundle of rights we are affecting on people's property, so it's extremely important
We understand.
that you may understand, but not everybody. So
Oh, I think we do.
I think we
I think everybody
I
has
think
been
we all understand.
discussion for months. So yes, we
So
definitely
I
do.
understand that, but it's still important that these conversations, these questions that she has are valid questions,
Yeah.
and we have the right
We
to
just don't
ask them.
need you lecturing us.
I'm not lecturing you. I'm listening to the man explain while you're interrupting me.
Okay.
All right, let's
move on.
right, let's
Let's move on.
That's a question I don't think anyone will object to. Francisco, the items in red, just so I understand, those are new things that have to be in based on changes in law that have taken place since the last adoption.
Included within the items in red are items that are statutorily required to be changed, such as
So for
the.
example, I'm looking at group childcare home. This is now
Very
required.
much so.
And so because this is required, we
Yes.
really don't have any leeway to change this. This is state law, basically.
That is
Okay.
absolutely correct.
Okay.
Included within the items of red are areas of the regs that were significantly rewritten because for clarity.
Okay.
Because the language that was used was confusing, vague, ambiguous. We changed wording throughout for clarity, for readability. But being very careful about that wording, that it still carries the same meaning, but it's just improved. So we didn't change every single word that was used. But where there were substantial changes to the text, we called that out in red to bring your attention to it. And then for any sections that were eliminated, we documented that in the table at the back, so you know the reason why those sections were eliminated, whether it's because of statute or redundancy. We're not trying to rush this process. We want to take the time that it affords to go through these, make sure you're comfortable with these. And then we've got a lengthy review process ahead of us, which I didn't mean to gloss over in my response to Mary, but Eric did a good job of describing that. You know, we need to share this document with the COG, with DEEP, with the Gateway River Commission. And we want to get a lot of eyes on this. And so we have a process that's going to allow for us to make adjustments. This will not be the 100% final draft. This might be the 98% draft.
And I just think I want to address Michael Barnes just for a second. I think where he's like coming to where we were maybe the last month, I was frustrated last month because we didn't have any dictionary or Bible as to where things went. So
Sure.
I had gone through, to your point, maybe it was in April, based on our old regs and what we had at the time. And I was crossing out and or but for nors that had changed because I didn't know what we wanted. And if I saw paragraphs that had been moved, I was worried about where those went. To what I think is you're trying to say, and then you're looking at one area in particular, the alcohol section that Eric just mentioned. I was like, what? So, I mean, so then I got frustrated and put it away. So what we asked for last month was just what we're doing tonight, is
Sure.
to have a Bible as to where things went and why. And we know that the three of you guys have met, but none of us have had this engagement really before. So I understand your frustration, and yes, it's important. And what I would think is when we find those areas that are your particular importance, like I'm gonna look at that alcohol stuff very carefully now, because I was frustrated by that. And I think, you'll find area that you really need to hone in on, and that's what we need to get back to you guys. Okay.
Yeah, and we welcome that feedback.
We need that feedback.
Is there a way, I know we don't want to rush it and when I look at this, it's kind of overwhelming, like you said. So like going forward, could we just say for the next meeting, we want the commissioners to review pages, it's all like college, right? Review pages 1 through 25 or whatever it is. And then we can really concentrate on that specific part.
I mean, yes, but, obviously it's 200 or whatever pages long. If we're going to do this in some reasonably expeditious manner there, I'm gonna ask it to be a little more than 25 pages at a time, but
Oh, that was a for instance.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, the goal here, ideally from my standpoint, and again, this may not work out, but ideally from my standpoint, my hope is that the final stage 1 approval occurs between now and November elections, so that I don't add in new commission members at the last possible second and have to then bring them up to speed. So that is sort of my internal timeline here of, while you're still on the commission, work with you so that when you drop off and someone takes your seat, I don't need to start from scratch on that. So again, as long as we can work it in generally the middle part of this year, that's my hope to make it happen.
I have a slight concern with that, just because this is such a critical document that's being changed. And if we're going to spend time on it, I understand what you're saying, because you're going to have to educate a whole nother group of people potentially, or maybe the same people, you never know. It's just, I hate putting this premature deadline on it because of an election, when this is a more important document than the election.
Again, it will take as long as it takes, Michael. I'm just saying,
That's fine. I just don't want to put a hard.
it's not a hard deadline. I'm giving you my thoughts as to why I would like to try and get it
And I'm
done.
just voicing my opinion.
And if it needs to take longer, it needs to take longer. But I'm hoping that, again, at the moment, you don't really have any major applications pending. So this would be a wonderful time to take.
I'm not saying it can't be done.
So.
If there's an area I think would be most productive for you to direct your energy, it would be a review of the use section.
That's
All right, because that's a substantial reorganization. You have lists, pages and pages of uses.
Yeah.
And we've organized that into a summary table, and it's organized very differently. And
bless you.
I think that would, I think that would be a very productive use of your time to start there. The procedural section, the site plan requirements, special permit requirements, the lettering and numbering might be different, but that's really all the same content carried over. The introduction, the preamble, and that stuff hasn't changed. But the use, it looks a lot different, and we had to make decisions about what, what uses, what kind of permit was required in some cases, because there was contradictory language across sections. And we generally were more conservative with, site development plan requirement, special permit requirement. If we found it said zoning permit somewhere else, we went with the higher standard. But I think that would be, we definitely want to get other eyes on that and make sure we got it right. Particularly with your accessory uses. Because the way your regulation for most accessory uses, some of them it's very clear, it's a special permit requirements called out. The way language is written for most of your accessory uses, it says that the accessory use shall be permitted as with the same permit or application type as the principal use. Which means if we're a special permit use, whatever use is accessory to that would also require a special permit. However, throughout your regs, you have language in other places that refers to accessory uses maybe the same type of accessory use requiring only a site development plan application. So we did our best to interpret what the requirement is. And I think that area really deserves a lot of attention. And we're very happy to receive some feedback on that to make sure we got it right.
And how did you point that out to us in here? Because when I did this before I got
Yeah.
frustrated, I had my old regs and the current regs, and I was like, what's this? You changed the name here.
Yeah.
So how do you propose we look at this versus this version? How do we do that?
There's not an easy way. We did try to give you a guide and with the table with all the sections so that if you're looking for something, you knew exactly where it was in the old regs and you want to make sure that regulation was carried over, you know where to look in the new document. You don't have to go from front to back looking for it. So I think that will help. The format is very different. And so the information for some of the content, the information is all together. It's just under a new section number. Other content has been split up where it's one part of it sent to this section, another part of it sent to this section. And that's very intentional because the organization of the document in its entirety works better. We're trying to put similar type of regulation together with other similar type of regulation. So if you have regulations that are relevant to your special permit requirements, and right now they might be scattered in 3 different locations in the regulations, we want to put that all in one place. And I see this in every community I work. You have substantial regulations that are buried under a 5-digit numbered item at the bottom of the list where you would not expect to find it. And where it really should be a section of its own because it's a really important regulation and it's buried at the bottom of the list where no one would think of looking for it. We want to undo that. Now I'm happy to kind of walk you through the types of changes we made from beginning to end. And let's do
Yes,
that.
yeah.
Actually, quick question, Francisco.
Yes,
So, as I'm sure you know, there's not a simple 2D hierarchy to all this. It's not a simple tree. So when there's extra dimensions, I'll use an example. So there's a couple of provisions in here on the Soundview Village District. For example, the mixed use one, there's a section of it in the mixed use, and then there's it's in Soundview. And so how did you think about how to balance, where's the primary and where do you do a back reference to draw that extra dimension in?
That's a very good observation and a very good question. So your Soundview Village District regulations they exist kind of in a vacuum right now. They're doing their own thing, right? And we want to better integrate them into the regulations as a whole. Because while that zone is, and we call it a special zone, it's fairly unique, it's a base zoning district like any other zoning district. It's just that it's very unique in terms of its uses permitted and the regulations around those uses and the properties are tiny. And we maintain a section of the regulations dedicated to that. The way we separate that out and decide what goes where is if a regulation is overwhelmingly or prevailingly specific to the district, to the zone, it's underneath that zone in the zoning regulations. It's organized as part of that zone. If the regulation is really more specific to the use, then we put that regulation in the use category underneath the use. So there are instances where we have regulations specific to uses in the Soundview Village District. But because it's specific to that use and it doesn't transcend a bunch of uses, we put it in the use regulations and we refer out to the Soundview Village District. So regulations that are specific to a use, that follow a use around, we put in the use regulations. If it's specific and relevant to the zone, we put it underneath the district regulations.
So you did it situationally, what the dominant one.
Excuse me?
So you want on a situational basis for which was the dominant and which was the referral?
Yes, yes.
One other quick question on the legislation induced triggered changes.
Yes.
Did you go through, A2 and the other relevant sections of CGS and sort of line by line say, is this sort of use it as a filter and say, is this conformant?
Yes, we have an internal checklist we use that we typically, as we're reviewing the set of regulations, we're looking for those items. And that could be, I mentioned a couple of them already, minimum dwelling unit size. We talked earlier about community residences. And there are others as well. And so we just go down that checklist and check for items that either are missing from your regs specific to regulating those areas or are non-compliant.
Okay, one instance of that, we probably want, I don't want to go down a rat hole with it now, but we want to visit at some point, which is the use of character.
That's a much bigger discussion, and because it's a little more esoteric and more involved, I think we want to take a deeper dive into that in the next phase of work, because there are significant implications surrounding that. So at the state, as a part of Public Act 2129, they changed the zoning enabling language so that character, just the simple concept of character alone can't be a basis for denial, which means that you really need to give shape as to what you mean by character. You have to get down to some metrics. You can't just say it's inconsistent with the character of our community and therefore it's denied. So it doesn't mean you can't use the word character, but you really need to describe what it is that you're trying to achieve and how it's in the interest of the community and be more specific. And in denying an application, you want to avoid character and just point to those more specific reasons. But that can be very involved and that really requires a lot of discussion. So we don't want to touch it yet.
Well, I was touching it when I was reading the first draft.
Excuse me, I'll just get my water. And then perhaps we can, I'll just walk you through the types of changes that we made. Okay. So I think the first noticeable difference might be in the, you can kind of measure it by thickness here. And that equals around 40 or 50 pages. And so where do we get that 40 or 50 pages from? Did we just get rid of a bunch of regulations?
Those come.
Right? There is a tremendous amount of redundancy in your regs. There are whole sections that are repeated verbatim in more than one place, sometimes almost twice in a row. And we just got rid of all that redundancy. By example, your use section where you repeat uses for all the different zones, and you go to a different residential zone and it's almost exactly the same list. Maybe there's some subtle differences. What a table allows you to do is you have that list and then you put your zones across in columns and that you shrink, 20 pages like that. So I want to ensure you that we're not, with the exception of where it's noted that we eliminated sections and the reason that we did that. We did not just decide that with the exception of we've got a section on the planning commission, which we tossed and we can talk about that. We generally speaking, we did not just take regs and get rid of them. We just better organize this document. And some other formatting changes that just wasted a little less space on the page. So the document is now organized into articles and sections. Your current document is chapters. If for some reason you really love having chapters, we could change the name of the articles to chapters. It makes no difference to me. It's just articles is a very typical convention in regulation. Chapters is not uncommon either. It makes no difference to me. So if you want to give that some thought, I'm happy to switch to chapters instead. we are sequential through the document. The page numbers start at 1 and then go sequentially, right? So if you're talking about page 10, you don't have to try to figure out, am I on the right page 10 or which page 10? So we go sequentially. The section numbering is consistent. So nomenclature is very important. We want to establish a solid nomenclature that we are adherent to. And it needs to be somewhat intuitive. And so we've gone with a 3 numeric digit nomenclature, and we go to letters and vice versa from there. Your nomenclature right now, it alternates. It gets as deep as 4 numeric digits before going to alpha. In other places, it's 1 numeric digit and then straight to alpha. So we want to be consistent with that. So I hope you find that the nomenclature, the numbering, the listing is somewhat intuitive. And it's most important, it's consistent. We use the same convention throughout. We don't all of a sudden jump to an A when in the prior list it was a 1. Okay. So that's very important. And we've set up a system in terms of the document itself that when we hand the document back to the town, that they can easily update it and it doesn't upset the apple cart. Everything renumbers on its own and things will fall into place. We have taken, you have a lot of content that is long paragraphs with very long sentences and many paragraphs following each other without any unique identification in terms of section numbering, which makes it a little harder to refer to that specific item that you're trying to refer to. If you're just pointing to a section and then there's 3 paragraphs and 20 sentences, or which part of this am I looking for? So generally speaking, we try to break up big paragraphs into smaller paragraphs, long run-on sentences into shorter sentences. And that's just for easy use and clarity. And that's also consistent with guidance. The Federal Plain Language Act was adopted a dozen or so years ago, more than that now, 2010. And there's a very good guidance document that we use, and it doesn't require towns, of course, this is federal policy. It doesn't require towns to comply, but it does set a very good standard for clarity of language and organization of documents. And so we follow that broad guidance in our work, and it strongly recommends getting away from legalese and breaking content down into smaller sentences, smaller paragraphs, and more list-based. So that's our general approach in terms of language or the organization of the content. I think you will also find that we now have in this format, we have a header and a footer on every page. So you always know exactly where you are in the document. You know what section you're in, what date, what version of the document you're in. So if someone had just copied a page, what date, which amendments it has up to what date or the effective date, whatever we decide to go with. So, which happens all the time. The one page gets copied, one page gets attached, gets pulled out, and well, what version of the regs did that come out of? So that will always, it'll be carried with it. In terms of the PDF format, this is an interactive document. So on the bottom, in the footer, all those boxes, you can click on them and it'll jump you to that section. And the cross references, which are all highlighted in yellow, which we need to do, we typically wait to the very end to do it until we're sure that we have everything where we want it. The cross references will all be hyperlinked. So if it says see section 4.2, you don't have to go thumbing through the PDF document, scrolling through it. You could click on that 4.2 and it'll bring you right to that place in the document. So digitally, it'll be a little easier to navigate. All right.
So
Yes.
where you have the sections, just for example, on page 2, 1.4, it says the savings clause, and it says in parentheses 11.21.6.
Yes.
So is that the old
That's the old, and so that's temporary. That's
And that's
just,
that's what I was asking, is that
Yeah.
temporary? Okay.
that's temporary. It's just for
That's
the
your cross,
draft.
But that's your cross.
That's just for the draft version. And so you can see where the content in that section came from.
Yeah, I mean, that's your cross. But
It is, and that's exactly what we built the table off of, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
without the table, it's like right there.
And I hope you'll find it's very helpful in that process. And in most cases, that content, comes across sequentially. By example, I'm looking at section 2.3, which describes district boundaries. And we have the zoning map that was, it's now 231, it was 251. Then we go to boundaries. It's now 232, was 252. There's a lot of content that just came over in the exact same order.
And I just want to make sure people understood what those references are, so it's easy to go back
Yes.
and forth.
That's correct. Thank you. Okay, continuing down my list. Capitalization, we're more conservative with use of capitalization and all capitalization because overuse can make a document very difficult to read. It's hard to tell where a sentence starts. We are reserving use for capitalization as you would with traditional writing and grammar, of course, beginning sentence, pronouns and names and that sort of thing. But we also, when we refer to any sort of permit type, whether it be special permit, zoning permits, site development plan, we maintain those in capitals because that's critical information. You want it to jump out. Zoning commission is capitalized, zoning enforcement officer is capitalized. But we're far more conservative with use of capitalization.
You're capitalizing,
Defined term type thing.
No.
what Jane asked.
So how are we gonna handle that?
So your defined terms are all in the glossary. And they are very readily accessible and they're far more complete. It's kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but the glossary now has a lot more terms than it had in the past. You had a lot of terms that were not defined. You had a lot of uses that were not defined. And it's really important that uses are defined in deciding whether or not an application really qualifies as the use that you're allowing. You need some sort of guide other than.
So is there some kind of just one statement somewhere that if words are in the glossary and defined, that's what's meant?
We do. We have a statement introducing that's. We do. We have a statement, generally speaking, as to how those are supposed to be used, and we could add language to that as you find necessary. The basic premise here is that all of the uses have a definition now. Every single use. If you add another use, we're going to make sure we have a definition for that. Most of the zoning terminology, certainly any zoning terminology that's at all unique to the town, is going to be defined here. And we've added a lot of other just commonplace zoning terminology that you didn't have a definition for before that we included in here. So I would, in addition to taking a look at the uses, I would invite you to review the definitions that we added or amended. And
Blue, I'm sorry, those are the blue ones?
yeah, so the ones we added are the blue, the ones we amended are red. And we have a key at the beginning of the definition section that shows that. And I'll just finish my discussion on definitions since we're on the subject.
If you were to capitalize the defined terms, would it hurt the document?
It just consumes all of the text. It makes it very difficult to read. And your prior version was not consistent with capitalizing terms. In some places it was, in some places it wasn't. We'd have to double the number of terms that were capitalized because you didn't capitalize them consistently. And it just becomes very difficult to read.
I can see for readability, it would be nice to know when a term is as you're reading.
Yeah, but it's things like there's site development, there's site plan, there's
Yeah.
streets, there's street line, there's street traveled way. So there's multiple definitions with the same words, so.
Once again, this is our recommendation for ease of use. If that's something that, you felt was working for you very well in the past and it didn't, it didn't compromise your ability to read the document, then we could revisit that, but we should be consistent in terms were not consistently capitalized in the current version.
I think it's fine as long as you say somewhere that anytime you see these words, they are the defined terms, not, just what Black's Law Dictionary says or something like that.
Right.
Since you're hyperlinking, would it be possible when you use a defined term to hyperlink it? to the-
Yeah, I mean, it's a little extra work, but that's also possible. It's just to make it a hyperlink phrase. Yes, that's correct.
The definition of a motor vehicle, was that citing the state's definition of a?
Yeah, I think we referenced the state's definition.
Like the DOT, the MV, they each have their own definition. So that's fine.
So it would be Department of Motor Vehicles, not DOT, and it would be in statute in their chapter of the regs. Yeah. All right, so that's capitalization. The number format, and I don't mean section numbers, but whenever we talk about quantity, what and once again, this comes down to consistency and readability. The federal plain language guidelines recommend that non-redundant numbering be used, which means you don't write out 9 and then put the number 9 in parentheses. And that was inconsistent across your regs. Sometimes it's a letter, sometimes a number, sometimes it's both. So our protocol for that has been 1 or 2. Number 1, number 2 are spelled out 1 or 2. Because a 1 by itself can get lost on the page and look like an L or a big I. So we always write that out, and unless it's in a table and it's just a series of numbers. And then a 2 we write out as well. Anything 3 and above, we just go to numbers, and we get rid of the redundancy, so we don't have 3 spelled out and then parentheses 3. It means the same thing, and that's a convention in contract law. As a matter of just to make sure you get it right, you spell it out, you write it. But we're making sure we get it right as we go along here, and that just once again it just helps you ease of understanding. And then we found some inconsistencies, which isn't to say we found a 3 written out and a 4 in parentheses, but we find the 4 in parentheses without the 4 spelled out before it, and that sort of thing. And it just invites more inconsistencies. So we want to simplify and have the number just jump out a little better. Terminology. We want to be as consistent as possible in terminology. By example, you'll allow both planned residential conservation developments and planned residential cluster developments. And they both have the same acronym. And they're both the same thing. But in your section of the documents that regulates that use or that zone, it's called conservation. However, all throughout the rest of the document, it's called a cluster subdivision. And that it just invites confusion. Are we talking about 2 different things, or is it the same thing? And if I have a cluster subdivision, are the conservation subdivision regs applicable to that? So we picked one, it's conservation, and we got rid of any references to cluster, so just to find and replace on that. So that sort of consistency is important. Commercial cutting and commercial logging is another example. It's half and half across the document. We went with commercial cutting.
What is considered commercial cutting?
It's logging, and it's defined in statute somewhat in the forestry practices section, and is over certain acreages for commercial purposes. So not to confuse it with like clearing the site for development or taking some trees on your property. It's it's harvesting trees. Yeah. Right. And there's a decent amount of regulation for that in the Gateway River Conservation Zone. But it's referred to logging in some places and cutting. And it's really intended to regulate all the same thing. All right, so that is just a couple examples of that. correction of errors and inconsistencies, which we found a lot of minor things that were not incredibly consequential. But others that, you know, if you really were a stickler about it, you'd really be problematic for you. By example, your commercial livery and boarding stables and riding academies. Your regulation is currently written, at least the version I was working in, says that those type of uses can have 6 horses or less constitutes a commercial horse farm or keeping. 6 horses or less. It's 6 or more, as I understand it. 6 or less is keeping of horses. So that's an error, and we correct that. So we change less to more. Because it's pretty clear that keeping of horses, which is more of a residential thing, not a commercial activity, is less than 6 horses. So we're able to discern some pretty obvious errors there and correct them in what we feel is the proper way. Grammatical errors and typos, we replaced all gender references to neutral references. I talked about redundant content already, but by example, on your special permit time limits, you have existing section 13B39, and only a page or 2 away, 13B51, have an entire paragraph that regulates the time limits. And as it is, we have to do some updates to those sections anyway because of statute. But those 2 paragraphs say exactly the same thing, and it just got stuck in 2 places. Got put in 2 places. So we removed that.
Some of that, what happened, I can explain it, wasn't really an excuse, but in an earlier version that was more streamlined, like you done, there was complaints by the citizenry that they wanted to be able to open the section for law. And they didn't, because we didn't have computers or anything then. They wanted to be able to read it in that section. So we ended up repeating stuff for that reason. But now I guess with computers, we can take it back.
Hopefully. The trouble with repeating, and I think you're probably all aware, is it invites inconsistencies. It may be the first time it was put in, it's the exact same language, and it does a good job of cross-referencing and explaining that, hey, it's really the same thing. We're just put it here for convenience. The trouble is maybe that regulation later is changed and someone says, hey, we need to update section blah, blah. And the other section is forgotten about. And now you have inconsistent regulations. Well, which one do we follow? And then when you find something that's exactly the same, or maybe 99% the same in 2 different places, it's not clear as to why it exists in 2 different places. Does this apply to 2 different districts or 2 different scenarios, 2 different cases?
That's what it was, that they wanted to be able to read through the, particular use and have everything all in that one place.
Yeah. And that had been a convention, and it's a little easier to do when your zoning regulations are simpler and there's just less content. It's a very common convention that each zoning district provides almost all the information you would need in that section, in that 5 or 10 pages of the regulations. And then 80% of that is repeated verbatim, except for the differences for the next zoning district, for the next residential zoning district or commercial. And not only does that just add page count, but it once again, it introduces inconsistencies, which we see all the time in our work. It's written a little different in one section, so it would give you the impression that it's the same thing is regulated different in a different zone when it's really was intended to be regulated in exactly the same way. And that's because over time, as one zone gets updated, it really should apply to all. And we want to get away from that and centralize content so that when it's updated, it's updated, applies consistently across zones as intended. And where you have regulations that are updated that are specific to a zone, we put it under that zone, or we call out the zone. And we can still continue to do that. We can still regulate zones independently, but it doesn't require us to build a separate set of mini regulations for each zone or for each use for that matter.
As we're reading these, is the intent to completely normalize the document so that there's no duplication and it's only,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there may be some, but to get away from that, absolutely, absolutely.
Isn't there some sections that are micro changes within the community that required that additional language? Is there,
Sometimes it was.
so are
Yeah.
we potentially losing any of that in the process?
We're being very careful not to. And so we have a section of the regulations dedicated to your zoning districts. And it continues to contain all the regulations that are specific to that zoning district. So while some of the regulations have been consolidated, anything that was really intended to be specific to a zoning district or maybe only 2 or 3 is still there. And those districts are still called out, or the regulations are still referencing the district where applicable. So we haven't lost any of that. We're not all of a sudden just taking a set of regulations and blanket applying them indiscriminately.
I understand.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Savings clause, and it's sometimes this reference also severability, that a very similar purpose. And you reference both a savings clause and a severability clause in different areas of your regulations, but they're just specific or applicable to those sets of regulations or zones. And what a savings or a severability clause says that if anything found, if this section of the regs or anything in the regs is found to be invalid, by court or whomever, that the rest of the regulations hold up. And so that the whole set of regulations isn't invalid. It's just that item is invalid. And you don't need to repeat that for every set of regulations you have or every zone. You just say it once. And so we've done that. We've taken 2 sections, we've merged them into one, and then we put them at the front of the document. So they're now savings clause right on page 2, section 1.4, that is now applicable across the entire list. All right. We updated references and cross references. So you have outdated reference, town sanitarian, or various versions of that. There's a lot of different iterations of that. Town health director and or their staff. It's legislate. All those are really fall now under the authority to legislate health districts. So we updated all those references to legislate. You have references to manuals and guidance documents. For example, the state stormwater management design guidelines and the soil and erosion control manual. They were both updated last year, 2024. So we'll point to the newer versions as amended. There are some statutory references that were just a little off the mark. So we corrected those to point to the proper section of the statute. You also have a lot of cross references that are pointing to sections of the document that were removed or that were moved. So it's pointing to a wrong section. And we flagged most of those. I think we got them all, but when we, in the end, update all those cross references, and they're all currently highlighted in yellow so that you're aware that all of these need to be updated. We're going to confirm that each one is pointing to the correct section. And so and sometimes it takes a little bit of work to figure out what the intention of that was, but we want to make sure it points you to the right section. And then I talked about definitions. We split the definition section in 2, and you probably noticed that we have zoning terminology, and then we have another section of uses. So terminology is setbacks and front and side yard, and what does that mean? Height and zoning terms. And the uses we put in its own section. And that's just so that if you're interested and you're trying to look up uses, it's all in one place. And you don't have to sift through all these terms that are being explained. If really your interest is my use what I think it is? And let me go down this list. As part of that work, you have a lot of cross references within your definitions now that says see also. And we didn't carry that over, and I'm receptive to your feedback on that. We typically do not include those sorts of cross references unless there's a really strong correlation between two defined terms that they're almost inextricably linked and that they should be cross referenced. And there may be some cases, and if there are, we're certainly happy to carry them back over. But your glossary, your definitions, it's not a thesaurus. We're not really trying to encourage people to go wandering around looking for things that they may or may not need. If they have a retail store, they want a certain type of retail establishment, they want to confirm that their store is as we describe as a retail, we'll send them to the retail section. And if then they discover, well, that's not quite what I am, they can now very conveniently look at the use table and they can just go down the line. Well, maybe I'm a retail food establishment or it's something else. Yeah, maybe that's what I am. And then they could go back to the glossary. So we don't need to necessarily get them in the glossary, start sending them all around on a scavenger hunt in the glossary. So I don't think all of that language was highly productive for you. But that being said, there may be some terms that you really feel like these two really should be, if they're not right next to each other or bundled in the definitions, they should be cross-referenced. And I'm certainly happy to reintroduce those, but I don't think you need to use it as liberally or as universally as you had. Just because something, a certain term or a certain use might have something tangentially in common with another use, I don't think it's incumbent upon us to send someone to go look at it if that may not have really any value to them. It's kind of suggesting your work isn't done. You should really go look at this. But maybe they don't need to. Maybe they had what they needed when they looked up the term. Okay. I think by the definitions being first more comprehensive, second being organized under uses and terms, it's much easier for someone to look at different terms across a couple of pages, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, than it may have been before, where you have more of your terminology kind of scattered throughout the document. We've done a better job of consolidating that. Okay. And we've also, and your regulations weren't too bad about this. I've seen much worse in other communities where regulations and definitions get tangled up or transposed. So where we find terms that are defined within the text of a regulation and not in a, and I'm not talking about in a definition section like we do with flood terms, but somewhere down a paragraph, as you're reading what it is, there's the definition, but it looks like a regulation, but it's really just defining what that use or term is. As best we can, we try to pull the definitions out of the regulatory content and put them in the definition section, whether at the back or within the section of the document that it belongs, and vice versa. We want to make sure we don't regulate from within definitions. And sometimes it's a fine line, because what a use is in a way kind of regulating it by just defining it. But if you're really getting into conditions and provisions within the definitions, that really belongs in the text of the regulations. And so we're going to try to put the definitions where the definitions belong and the regulatory content in the text of the regulations. Like I said, there wasn't, the regulations weren't too bad with respect to that, but we did do a little bit of cleanup with as far as that goes. There's probably more we do with respect to building height. You're just trying to accomplish a lot with that definition. But
Well, it's different in 2 different zones in our town.
And so we've maintained that distinction. for that reason.
Is it the intent that any instance of a defined term in the regulations is only used in the context of that definition, and so there's no generic use of it?
What we've done this. We have not taken all of the definitions and put them at the back. You have these sections of the document where you have terms that are very specific to that set of regulations, whether it be the gateway area, the flood zone is a great example. I mean, for federal purposes, FEMA, there are very specific definitions to start of construction. We maintain those definitions in those sections, and we say for the purposes of this section, these terms are defined as follows. And then there's very little redundancy with respect to those terms. Usually only exist in that part of the regs. And there are very few instances where you have the same term that's defined a little different that's at the back, that's applicable throughout. There is a small amount of overlap. And to the extent you find that at all confusing, we can put cross references in to help explain that. But we haven't, not all definitions are universally applied. Okay. And there are a few different sections where you'll see that the definitions, we have a section of definitions at the beginning of that regulatory content.
So when there's specific scope or
When it's-
context,
When it's directly applicable to that zone. SVDD, I think we maintain some definitions specific to that district as well. Okay. We also removed some terms that you don't need to define. The town old line is not an authority on what an acre is and is not. That's a standard unit of measure. So we took out, I'm seeing maybe some different opinions. So we just removed standard units of measure, things that you don't need to provide definition for.
We use cubits, not
Yeah, there's
cubits is what we use here.
right. So we took out things that you don't need to provide a definition for that. There's no one's going to argue as to what an acre is, 43,560 square feet.
Well,
Right?
it used to be 40,000. There's a builder's acre.
Wow.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore.
Never got that anymore.
You have the R80 and R40 zones that are sort of the legacy of that.
They
So
used to
yeah.
be all over the place. An
Right.
acre was 40,000.
And sort of last items here. I talked a little bit about unnecessary and ineffective content. So we removed references to when a regulation was adopted or amended. And this goes to your earlier point about the need to maintain a record. This document, assuming you adopt it or some form of it really represents what we often refer to in some communities as a new addition. And in Stonington, we just worked with them to adopt their 28th edition. And when they adopt a new edition, they clean it out and they begin the record of amendments again. And the 27th edition was filed away and made sure safely filed away and, digitally and physically. And when there's reference needs to be made to amendments or the regulations as they stood prior to that date, that version is referenced with all its footnotes and that sort of thing. So we have cleaned out all the footnotes, which doesn't mean that record disappears. It's still here and it'll be preserved here. What we recommend doing moving forward is to maintain all amendments in an appendix at the back in a table. That way it's less disruptive to the organization of the document. It can be really challenging to fit that content into a footnote without things moving all over the place. And it gets really messy in the document. So we recommend maintaining a log in the appendix and every amendment, its effective date, the section that's applicable to or sections, and a brief explanation as to what's changed is provided there. And you actually have more room to provide more description rather than trying to squeeze it into the footer of a page. And that's our reason for going with that approach. So you will continue to record amendments, and that information will continue to be available to a user, the new set of regulations going forward. If they want to look up the effective date of a prior amendment, they do need to go back to this document, which what we recommend doing is when this is adopted and there's, the PDF link is available, that the PDF link to this on the same page continues to be available with some text explaining its relevance and what you might need to use it for. Okay. We removed boilerplate and explanatory content. There's some of it in the Gateway River Zone that was some of the boilerplate language that was handed, and it just all of it just got moved in, and just explaining as to how a town is to delegate administration, and that you've already delegated it. It goes to the zoning commission. That's already in the works. There's language that's just was part of the original boilerplate language or part of the purpose of the amendment, part of the description of the proposed amendment that is not really functional for you anymore and not operative. And, by example, if you want more detail on that, section 1121(1) of, I think we're now talking about your existing regs. It's your adult entertainment, your adult use regs. You've got a pretty big introductory section within the purpose statement. That's kind of it looks like it should be part of the purpose statement, but what it really is, it's part of the rationale. It's part of the sales pitch for adopting it. And it's not effective. It doesn't really do anything for you. And I'll go to it now just so you can appreciate the excessiveness of it. And then I'll point out what's really operative, the important part of it that we maintain. And it's 1121.1 of your existing regs. So you have 3 paragraphs under 1121.1, purpose and intent. The first paragraph does all the work for you. A purpose statement is incredibly beneficial. It provides context and understanding. If there's anything that's unclear about what the regulation is trying to achieve, you can fall back on the purpose statement to guide you in interpreting application of the regulation. And that statement doesn't necessarily need to be too robust. It can be a couple sentences, a paragraph. The purpose statement is really the first paragraph of this section of 1121. And it does all the work. And it says the purpose of this section is to regulate uses because of their nature, are having potential serious, objectionable operational characteristics, deleterious effects, adverse effects, et cetera, et cetera. It explains this is why we've gone to the length of preparing a regulation that's this detailed and this specific is for all these reasons. The rest of it that follows, persons under the age of 18 may be attracted to adult-oriented establishments or seek to enter or loiter. You don't need any of that. You don't need any of that. You described it in the first paragraph, and that's just, it's dead weight. So we can just clear out that stuff. That would have been part of the argument for adopting it. That would have been what the argument a commissioner or the staff made, that the reasons why you should adopt it. But you don't, the entirety of that language doesn't need to be carried in. So that's one example. The SVDD provides another example in its introduction and purpose. There's a very nice geography lesson about the SVDD, and that's great. It kind of describes its coastal setting, but that's not really operative. There's a purpose statement in there that is very important, is very operative. So we maintain that. We strip out some of the geography lesson. Okay. We We removed content outside of zoning authority that is otherwise regulated by building, fire, or public health codes. An example of that would be section 17.4.4.2. And, you know, we have multiple examples, but just to give you a sense, all fill and vent piping shall connect to the top of the fuel oil tank, and valves shall not be installed on return piping. The system shall be designed for the maximum pressure required by the fuel oil burning equipment. All work may or may not commence after issuance of a permit by the official O-line building official. That's completely building code stuff, and that may or may not be up to date with what building code requires. That's something that's well outside of really your zoning purview and what the statute's asking you to do as a commission. This is something that is rightly called out the building official under their capacity to review to ensure it's consistent with building code. You know, you have, as a commission, you have no way of evaluating that in a proposal and a site development plan or special permit proposal that's coming before you. So that's really, it's serving no interest. So we would remove something like that. There's a paragraph of your regulations that gets into detail about drinking water supply. And once again, that's falling to the health official to establish that. So we did not carry that over. We did maintain a lot of the septic and sewer type stuff that it's more traditionally falls under your authority to review.
When you talk about the water supply, you're talking about like public water supply per se?
Yeah, let me go to the exact.
Source water protection?
Yeah, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about water supply and not source water protection, which we maintain all those aquifer protection regs as they are. Refer to the section. Water supply 1216.2. It's a section on water supply required for your PRCDs. You know, water, first of all, water supply is required for all development. It's not a regulation that's unique to the PRCDs. And then secondly, it's regulated by both state and the health district. And so for those reasons, we removed that section. Okay. Okay, my next list is regarding statutory compliance. And you brought up some of those items that were at least on your radar. And I'll just go through these one by one. Community residences. So community residence is defined by the state. Really, there's a group, there are different types of residences that are now really under a regulatory umbrella as defined by statute. And it all involves single family homes with 8 or fewer people, but with people with different types of needs. It could be children with disabilities. It could be people adults in treatment. So there are different types of community residences. What's most important is that Connecticut General Statute tells us that you cannot regulate those in any way differently than a single family residence. You can't require a special permit for them. You can't prohibit them any place that you allow a single family residence. You can't put limits on them. You have to treat them exactly the same way you would a single family residence. The state licenses and regulates them, and the state has the authority to enforce if there are any sort of violations.
Or does it only say that anything 8 or under? Does it tell?
Yeah, so we point to the state's definition, and it's 8 or fewer. And I'll go to that section now. I'll just read it out. So we no longer have a group home for those with mental retardation or some of the other outdated terms that were used because they all fall under the same regulatory umbrella. They're community residences. And going to our new definition of that, Community residence, a residential structure for persons with intellectual disabilities per CGS 17A 227, or for children with mental or physical disabilities per that same section and 17A 145 to 17A 151, or for persons receiving mental health or addiction services per Connecticut General Statute 19A 491. In each one of those types, you have to allow in any zone that you allow single family residential by the same standards, which doesn't mean you can't continue to regulate things like how the property is used and setbacks and accessory structures. You just regulate it the same way you regulate single family structures.
So because we don't involve ourselves in parking on single family structures, you can't do that on these.
Nope.
A little bit like 830G.
Well, under 5002, you may not be able to regulate parking at all anyway, so.
Well, right. Okay, unless there are any questions on that, I'll move ahead. Family and group childcare homes. This is very similar to the regulation on community residences. You have to allow those the same places you allow single family residences under the same permit type. And I think the state's intention with this particular regulation is that there's a desperate need for childcare, and they want to ensure that it is readily available to families and it can be in their neighborhoods. So we do define both those terms. A family daycare is done in a home. It's done by the occupants of that home. It's like a home occupation. A group childcare home, it's still a fairly small. It's a little bigger than a family daycare, but it's not a big commercial daycare center. It's conducted typically out of a single family residence, but it's not occupied. It's not occupied residence. So it's been fully converted into some sort of a daycare center, but it's not a big commercial type development. And the state basically tells us you have to allow those wherever you allow single family homes.
This might be esoteric, but
Yeah.
for example, I live in a community that's governed by a HOA. It's a private road.
Right.
So if I want to make my house into a group child care, we have 24/7 staff, a lot of cars going in and out. It's actually a private road with an HOA. How would the state statute interface with those requirements?
Well, first of all those properties need to be licensed, and the state is going to have certain licensing requirements, which isn't to say that because you're part of a homeowner association, they would be precluded from being established. The licensing mostly is around safety and security and all that. So a group child care home is a facility that accommodates 7 to 12 children. And so it's not a high traffic facility. 7 to 12 kids. Let's say it has 12 kids.
My background, I used to do a ton of child protection work, visiting group homes.
All right.
They're hubs of activity.
Okay. All right. I just don't want to confuse it with a commercial daycare center that might have 30 or 40 kids.
You have full-time staff, you have professionals coming in to take care of the children's needs, tutors, family coming to visit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly a lot more activity than a single family home, to your point.
Right.
I can only tell you what the state is telling us we can and cannot do with the zoning regulations. Right. And the zoning regulations cannot treat those any differently than a single family home.
It was just a question of curiosity because it's really that cookie cutter when you have private roads.
It's not. And so I haven't personally been involved with seeing the establishment of one in an area where there's a homeowner association. Right. So I can't speak from experience as to what some of the constraints were, the hurdles, or what some rights that the homeowner association has with respect to controlling that use. I unfortunately don't. I could certainly look into that and do a little research, But I can't speak from experience.
I
with
just
that.
envision down the road, something like this happening in that type of community,
Yeah.
and there's gonna be outrage out there.
Yeah, they'll immediately, because they've already done it. There would be lots of communities where you can't have any children at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On purpose. Yeah, so now you have.
Well, so the federal government, under its housing exemption for 55 and older, allows that. And so, but I don't want to go down too far down that road. But there are very few instances where you can control who lives in a house, whether or not kids can be there, and that's one of the only carve outs.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's like that would be the, something between the, who's ever running the home and the homeowners association. Zoning doesn't, we can't get involved.
Right. Okay.
Detour's over.
All right.
You think so, until I ask the question.
Yeah. All right, I'll get through this list and then we can go to additional questions. I had mentioned earlier dwelling unit size. Did anyone have any questions about that? It states very clear. You cannot establish a minimum dwelling unit size. It can only be controlled by building code. And your regulation did have one section that references that.
It was from beach areas and we haven't.
Yeah.
dealt with that in a long
All right, so we took that out. Outdoor dining. You have to allow it for any food establishment. They have to meet certain standards, but you have to allow it. You can't prohibit it. And that was done during COVID. It was a COVID response. It's Connecticut General Statute 81cc, and it basically says that any food or beverage service establishment is entitled to do outdoor dining. There are certain provisions, time of day, they can't block pedestrian access, but you can't have a parking requirement that's additional for the establishment specific to that outdoor dining area. And you can't prohibit. So you have to allow outdoor dining as a permitted use, and you can't require more parking for it. And for here's it. If you strictly apply the regulations, an established restaurant can set up outdoor dining in their parking area, consuming several parking spaces. And you can't require them to provide more parking spaces. So we need to make sure that you're adequately permissive, and you can still set all sorts of conditions, provided you allow it. There's likely more work we could do in that area. I'd recommend just pushing off to the next phase, but we want to ensure that we're not prohibitive of outdoor dining, which would be in direct conflict with the statute.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Is it related to regulatory standards?
Yeah.
Should wait for that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So now the residential zone, you have the two use tables.
Yeah.
Whereas you've allocated all the commercial uses and special uses and waterfront district all into one, right?
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, relates to in waterfront business, commercial and light industrial districts regarding like the landscape buffer buffer requirements for non-residential uses.
What are you looking at, Mike?
14.2.
Of your existing regs?
Oh, no, of your.
Of the new regs.
Which would be.
Okay.
Section 14.
Okay, 14.2. Right. So we're on section 14, performance and lot standards.
Is that
Yeah.
like some of the waterfront zone areas? Their land might not be suitable to be able to meet these landscape buffers.
Mhm. So these regulations should, if we brought this content in correctly.
They might be the original, I'm not sure. I'm just noticing.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm trying to, okay, that's what I'm trying to get at.
only because the way it's listed is in waterfront business, commercial and light industrial districts.
So,
Created a new subsection or a new
Yeah.
section, so.
okay. So 14.2, our new section, this is buffer requirements for non-residential use, right? Landscape buffer.
I already exist.
Right, so 14.2 right now in the new regs in 14.2 reads in waterfront business, commercial, light industrial districts. And then it goes into two items. One, that there's a required building setback with suitable landscaping that has to be provided, not less than 6 feet.
Yeah.
In section 4.6, this section starts, and this, once again, this is a big, long paragraph. We've broken it into two items. It starts with in waterfront business, commercial and light industrial. So we carried it over verbatim, but which, you point out the fact that the waterfront business district, it's somewhat unique. Properties are probably very constrained. So the question mark is, as written, is this regulation really, should it be applicable as written to the waterfront district? Should we be a little more sensitive to the properties in that district? And I think, that's a very good example of exactly what we want to explore in the next phase of this work. Right now, we assume that when this was established and applied to the waterfront zone at that time, that it was determined that, yeah, this is going to work fine for the waterfront business district. And so we're trying to carry it over verbatim.
Okay. Just so everybody's clear, my concern is that the vegetation that would allow for the type of buffer that they're requiring is the evergreens and stuff like that. A lot of the waterfront areas are filled tidal marshes. So therefore, if they're inundated with tidal waters, they're not going to support the type of vegetative growth that these type of plants would require.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things you could put a note and say, fix it
Sounds
next
good.
time.
I just wanted,
Yeah.
that's what I'm observing, so that's why I was asking.
In fact, I'm going to flag it right here in my document so I remember to come back to it when we get to the next phase. Okay, going down the line. Electric vehicle charging. Your regulations are very good here. You're kind of out in front in that you do have an electric vehicle charging requirement. A lot of communities still don't. However, it's not perfectly consistent with Connecticut general statute. And you have, I think, quantity of 2 you require. Statute says 10% of whatever parking you're providing has to be electric vehicle. So that's.
Wait, say that again? So yeah, because it was 40, you guys moved it down to 30.
I don't know, we have two.
Yeah, let me,
Listen,
I'll refer to,
I didn't know there's a state statute though.
yeah, there is. And so we want to be
Is that
consistent.
about after you adapted?
After.
Yeah.
They'll make it seem like I was some crazy person that didn't exist yet.
no,
So we want to be consistent with what the statute requires. So it just required us to make a very minor change to reference percentage instead of a specific quantity.
Yep.
To be consistent with the way the statute is written. Other than that, it's very well written. It looks a lot like what the statute requires. But I did
Are
want
there
to.
any approvals that that adversely affected by us saying 2 really had to have a percentage?
We haven't approved any yet.
Yeah,
That's what I'm asking.
We haven't.
Okay.
haven't had anyone take advantage of that special.
It only took us 2 meetings to put that all together too.
Well, one was in 1 year, and then we talked about it until the next year, right?
Yeah, it took 2 years.
And that's an example of a regulation that is now, it's exists in 2 different places. And the reason being is because we want to, it does provide a requirement for parking spaces. It's a special type of parking space. So we want to address it within your parking and loading regulations. We want to flag it there. So when someone's trying to figure out, design their parking lot, they're doing their diligence to make sure they have all the spaces that are required. We identify what the requirement is there in terms of the spaces. The rest of it is a little more technical on how it needs to be built and how it needs to be compliant. So we consider the structure itself to be an accessory structure. So we point to the accessory regulations for all the details on how it needs to be built and laid out, and that sort of thing.
So
Okay.
as an accessory use, but
Yeah.
if it's required as part of building a plaza
Yeah.
for ease of use.
Yeah.
Is that considered an accessory use versus installing an electric vehicle charging station in the Halls Road existing facility? That's an accessory use.
There are a lot of instances of an accessory use that is built at the same time as the principal use that's integral to the site development and under the same permit, even though it may be a special permit requirement. You don't require the applicant to go pull a second special permit and go
Okay.
through a separate public hearing.
Okay.
It's all bundled together.
The other distinction I would make, Paul, is could you have that by itself or is it tied to a primary use?
Right.
Many of your accessory uses don't exist in the absence of the primary use.
Right.
So that's what we call it, accessory, but we generally have a standard that goes with it. And I have calls on a almost weekly basis by people who want to do an accessory use without a primary use, and I have to say, can't go there, the regs don't allow for that. So I think that's part of the distinction we're looking to make in the regs.
Unless it was your intention to allow someone to open up, to develop a property with 20 of these stations as a business, right? Kind of like the newest version of a gas station. Unless it was your intention to allow electric vehicle charging as a principal use, then it really should be identified as an accessory use, which is why we're locating in that section.
Okay.
But there's a parking requirement associated with that. So we require a certain number of those spaces. You did what you currently do, and the statute is telling us that that's what's required. But someone might also optionally just want to build them. They're not required to, but they may just want to provide one. And the regulations provides them guidance as to how they need to be built, maintained, what kind of signage is allowed, setbacks, location, screening, lighting, et cetera. So we've maintained all of that. Okay.
Now they're coming out with internally lit advertising all over them.
We,
That's something that we have to really make sure that our regulations are clear about, because we've even had
Yeah.
previous zoning enforcement officers that didn't realize that no internally lit signs are allowed. Hold on, so we've got them now at 2 gas stations.
right.
We
And,
didn't
and
realize it.
in Stonington, we wrote that prohibition in to the electric vehicle charging regs that they can't be internally.
You know, we have it across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Don't miss that one. It was apparently in such a small place that
Yeah.
he didn't.
Yeah. We don't want them turning into signs.
That's what they.
Yeah.
would do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how they're financing them, is to make them advertising signs.
All right. Another very simple one. We amended who approves locations for gas stations and auto service and sales establishments. There's something called a certificate of locational approval. It's required for those types of businesses per statute 1454 and 14321. And for whatever reason, the legislature has flip-flopped on this, who should be in charge of signing off on these at least 3 different times. ZBA to ZEO to staff to commission. It's been all over the legislative history on it. It's pretty lengthy. Currently that resides with the ZEO in one instance, and it was removed from the ZBA. So we make sure we point to who has that authority to approve the location for these. And so it now points to the correct authority on those. Next item is your special permit time limits. This is a very complex subject matter, and it is in case law as well. The courts have been trying to get their heads wrapped around how to treat special permits with respect to time limits. And what's generally understood as convention is that special permit runs with the land, which means it's recorded in the land record. And once approved, if the property is sold, that use as it was approved gets carried over to the new property owner because it's a right that is attached to land. Yeah, the courts have taken a look at this and have, in one case at least, in International Investors versus Town of Fairfield, and we're working with Fairfield right now, rewriting their regs too. They've determined that a special permit can in fact have an expiration date on it. So you can issue a special permit for excavation of the site, some sort of sand and gravel processing, and you can put a time limit on that. That's okay. That's not running afoul of a special permit runs with the land. What's most critical is that the special permit expiration is consistent with what the legislation requires in terms of the site plan application time limits and expiration dates. But most of your special permits are going to be associated with a site development plan. And Connecticut statute is very specific about expiration dates on site plans, as it's described in the statute. And there was a carve out during COVID to allow for projects that may have been delayed, really weren't delayed by COVID, that really gave them a really long horizon, like 19 years.
14 with a 5-year extension.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. We made sure we have all that language in there describing it. Other than that, a site plan is 5 years. There's some cases where you can make it 3 and then you can allow for 2 1-year extensions or a 2-year extension. Other than that, it's a 5-year. So you just need to make sure that if you set an expiration date for a special permit and there's a site plan that's been approved, is that your expiration date from the special permit is not earlier than the site plan's expiration date by statute. And so we've rewritten that section to lay that out. So that section was substantially rewritten, and which is why it's all in red. And I'll go over it with you very briefly right now as to how we handle that.
Whereas previously we had a 2-year expiration on the special permit.
That's right. And it was a little bit nuanced, but that's right. So I'll put them, I'll read them kind of side by side. Go over. I think it's worthwhile spending some time on that. I just want to make sure you understand with and agree with our approach. So currently it's in section 9632. And the new section is 1952.
The new one's 19.52.
Yes, it is.
For applications, we have one storage facility that is approved under the 19-year allotment, Frank Morales property. So
You know, the building.
Okay, 9632. There we are. Completion of work. It's a big long paragraph. And so this is site development plan, completion of work for site development plan. And then the next session is completion of work for special permit 964. So work in connection, this is your existing reg, work in connection with the special permit shall commence within 18 months and shall be completed and use established within 3 years. So there are two things there. First, you're saying that if you need to start to work within 18 months, if you don't, you're in violation of the special permit. If there's a site plan associated with that, they have the right to take 5 years to do that work. So you can't revoke their special permit because they have the authority under their approved site plan to take 5 years to do that work. And then if there were, as you point out, the storage place, they might have 19 years. So we've consulted with on our team with Peter Olson from Land Use and Conservation Council. He's a land use attorney, and he's reviewed this section for us, and we're following the advice he gave us, which means we're removing that requirement that work begin in 18 months as a blanket requirement. And we're removing the restriction of the 3 years that it has to be established. And that's the big change. The rest of it is just, you know,
Is there a way that we can, if it's gonna be a long time, I think part of the reason for the 18 months is it's still on the radar screen of our regulators and our enforcement people. 4 years and 11 months, it's
You-
not. Is there anything that we can do to have them tell when they're gonna commence work? Because that then means somebody's coming down there to, watch out for the project.
you can, as part of a special permit review, you have a right to ask questions and request a lot of information of an applicant. And it does, and that doesn't necessarily, it could be stated, but doesn't necessarily need to be stated in the zoning regulations. You could,
Then it would be blanket. wouldn't it?
you could very certainly ask for what the anticipated start date is or approximate
Or even
schedule.
If we don't ask what the date is, but just say when you're gonna start. The condition.
Yes.
A condition of your approval is when you're gonna start. You gotta call up our CEO and tell them you're starting.
You can do that. You can do that. What you can't do is revoke their special permit if they
Can we
don't.
put it in there.
if-
That'll be a requirement. Cause that'll keep it on the radar.
Yeah.
Otherwise it won't.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a note of that right now.
It can just be a universal condition. That makes it easier.
We can add that to the list of requirements as part of the special permit.
I didn't realize that the 19-year thing started from 2011. I
Yeah.
thought it was only permits that are approved during COVID, like from that March 2023 or 2020 to.
It took anything that may have been approved and it's some sort of development or in progress, and just pushed it out.
I don't know. Yeah, it's substantial.
So if you already had a permit that was scheduled to expire during
Before,
COVID,
yes.
Yeah,
just
and they
pushed it
just
out.
pushed it out like a decade. All right, so the way we've handled this is, and now in section 19.5.2, the completion of work for, well, first of all, we're going to first talk about your site development plan, because that's really kind of what prevails here. So 19.5.2 this is a simplified version of the regulatory language. All work in connection with site development plan, except an approval made under items B, C, and D, and those are basically the carve-outs related to COVID, shall be completed within 5 years of approval of the plan. And the zoning commission may grant one or more extensions of the time to complete all or part of the work in connection with the site development plan, provided the total extension or extensions do not exceed 10 years from the original date the site development plan was approved. That's statutory language. If for some reason they exceed that 10 years, they have to come in for new site development plan approval, right? It doesn't mean that all work has stopped and can never be resumed. They just have to go through the process again. And the state is putting that maximum limit on that so that projects don't drag on forever without a reassessment. And then there are carve-outs for those dates, and there's 3 of them. They follow items B, C, and D. So that lays out your site development plan, which really governs how you can regulate expiration of your special permits. And so now I go to your proper section, your special permit here. .6, expiration of special permit. And I may have said special permit before for that site development plan application. But what we just talked about was site development plan. 20.6. So the way this now reads, remember before it was you got to start 18 months and you have 3 years to do the work. The commission may set an expiration date for a special permit not before the expiration of any associated and approved site development plan. As specified in section 19.5, so we point them to that section. Except that for Connecticut General Statute 83C, the following shall apply. And these are basically the COVID extensions that follow.
Do we have any special exceptions that don't have a site plan?
In most cases, there would be a site development plan. I mean, you have the right for a special exception, special permit use. You have the right to waive the site plan requirement. But I think in most scenarios, you're probably going to require some form of site plan, even if it's a very basic site plan that you're approving.
Like for instance, tonight with the doctor's office there, I mean,
Yeah.
she doesn't change anything exterior to the building by and large. I mean, she showed where her parking spots were, but you didn't ask for an entire new site plan of the site for that. You just basically worked off of what was already in place. So yes, it was a special permit. Yes, it had a very basic site plan, but you're allowed to waive pieces of that reg to only get the pieces that you think you need to allow you to make that approval. So you had an example tonight where theoretically, yes, there was a site plan, but realistically, most of what you would require for a site plan was not necessarily detailed out in this application.
Yeah, so that's an example where there was a site plan that was approved at an earlier date,
Right.
but the use hasn't been established there. That is a special.
Right. So you could ostensibly, given the expiration date, you could figure out what the expiration date of that site plan is. If you could set, if this were a use that you wanted to put some time constraints on, you could stipulate a requirement that use be established by a certain date, as long as it's meeting or exceeding the expiration of that site plan.
The site plan's already expired. Because he built the building.
Right, but you approve the special permit based upon that site plan. But I mean,
Yeah, so
this isn't the best example because you have a use that you're comfortable with existing in perpetuity, right? I think a better example of where it may be desirable, and I'm not suggesting that this is anything you would approve, but let's say some sort of sand and gravel, topsoil type operation. You have a large property, an applicant, let's say your zoning allows for them to do some earthwork and remove material from the site and sell it. And they want to do that for a few years. And they pull a site development plan that shows exactly the contours, where they'll do the grading, how they're going to, site restoration plan would be the site development plan. How are you going to restore the site? What contours are you going to leave us with? What's going to look like? Where's new planting going to occur? Restoration planting. But you don't want that use to continue for 20 years, right? 5 years, fine, 5 years, but it needs to be restored and then, of course, require some sort of bond. But you want that special permit to expire. And you want to ensure that that use doesn't continue indefinitely or for 10 or 20 years. And that's where you can, in fact, set an expiration. So it becomes really a temporary special permit. It just can't be for a period of time that's shorter than the approved site plan.
That's applying to specifically new development, not grandfathered.
That would be right. Correct. Yeah, a new use.
So a new subdivision who's trying to build a bunch of new lots, but not an existing or potentially existing gravel operation, right?
Yeah, and this is a very complicated area of zoning regulation. Is separating out site activity and earthwork that is occurring as part of a development versus work that is really extracting resources. And what some, that's exactly right, because what sometimes happens is that a site plan gets filed, maybe even a subdivision approved. And what you've actually just approved is, a sand and gravel operation. Right. And the development does not occur.
Got one of those that
Yeah, we have one.
Yeah.
It's going on it right now.
their time is passing and you gave them no further extensions. So
It looks like they're chewing right through it.
Yeah. We removed the part that it's in clear violation of our interpretation of the law and based upon some of the case law, which is that you can't rescind that special permit if the activity hasn't started because their approved site plan they have the authority by the state to have 5 years minimum. And that we took, so we took 18 months and then three-year cap off of it. We left language in there that still says that you can set an expiration date. You still have that authority. It can't be for a period shorter than or sooner than the expiration of the site.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there.
So would that have given Sahaki a 5-year ability versus the 18 months that we put on it based on?
Well, no, because he previously had a special permit. You were just extending it out.
Okay.
Okay, so you had the right to extend it out, but again,
Let's just say someone else came in with that same scenario, that would give them, we can't shorten it to 18 months. They could be as long as 5 years.
again, assuming that it's a brand new special
Of course,
permit.
I'm talking
Yes.
separate.
Yes.
Yeah. A brand new special permit has to be for 5 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you can still, like I said, you can still put an expiration on a special permit. So going back to the worst case scenario, the approved development that just turns into a sand and gravel lot extraction establishment. Site plans approved for 5 years. You can set an expiration date on this. You can condition the special permit that if the site development is not completed within 5 years, the special permit expires. You can put that condition. It can be the same expiration of site development plan.
It just can't be less.
It can't be less. So that means if they did not build what they were supposed to build, completed it, or even begun it for that matter, the special permit expires. And then they have to go through the whole public hearing process again, to update all their studies, reports, surveys. They have to come back to you with a full special permit. So there's definitely an incentive there and a control that you still have that authority. So this gets a little confusing. That's the concept that a special permit runs with the land. That's really meant to apply that to properties when they're sold and transferred from one owner to another. It should not be interpreted to mean that once approved, there's no time constraints on it whatsoever.
It has to have that date in it, so it gets recorded with the date in it.
It just has to be consistent with the approved site plan. Okay. So that covers both the site development plan and special permit time limits. Similar to that is that with non-conforming uses and regs, the state is fairly strict about this. So if you have a non-conforming use that's discontinued for any reason whatsoever, whether it's vacated or property burns down or something, you cannot just set an arbitrary date that if it's not resumed in 6 months, no matter what, it's gone. You cannot never resume that use. What the state says is that an applicant only needs to demonstrate intent to reuse, which means they come in, they pull. Well, so the question is, what does that mean? So what we've rewritten that termination of use around the intent, demonstrated intent, and that could be interpreted fairly broadly that they've continued to pay their property taxes, they're not delinquent on any property taxes. Maybe they've come in, they pulled a permit for work, maybe there's ongoing work, maybe they've sent a letter that says, I intend to resume this use 2 years from now. It's a very low bar of intent, but you can't pull it away if there's any demonstrated intent to reuse.
So we had this come up with something in the beach areas where somebody wanted to come in. He had a pre-existing non-conforming, but he wanted a whole new permit to do something different on his lot. And so we asked him, so are you intending to, give up your previous use? And he said, absolutely not. And he wants us to approve of completely new use.
Yeah.
And I found that extraordinarily difficult. In fact, I just didn't think it was right that if we approve a new use by him applying for it, that he didn't give up the previous use.
Right.
But his lawyer told him to ask that question, I'm sure.
So that threshold is just as low as paying the property tax.
I mean, theoretically, Sherry Stones has never abandoned.
Correct.
You know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm all for protecting non-conforming use.
It could be that, you know, the property, the not being delinquent on property taxes is probably the lowest bar of meeting that standard. And that's probably something that could be argued in court.
There's a case law out there that says, as long as you haven't done something to the property that demonstrates the irrevocable intent to change that use,
Mhm.
you can always resume the discontinued
Yeah.
use.
Yeah,
There have
makes
been
sense.
gas stations that were discontinued for 20 years,
It came back.
but the pumps were still there,
Yeah,
and
infrastructure.
therefore they never irrevocably
Right.
lost the ability to resume operation as a gas station,
Makes sense.
and they started again. So a lot of it has to do with, have you irrevocably lost that ability? And again, going to your point there, once you've changed it to some other use, you have now irrevocably said, okay, I want the new use, not the old use. And so I think it's
Right.
fair to say, if you take the new use, you're getting rid of the old use. But if they're just, again, continuing to let it sit.
Yep.
Arguably, it can sit as long as they're willing to
Not
say.
a case for abandonment.
It's not, it hasn't been abandoned, it's merely been
Not
temporarily
utilized.
not utilized. So again, temporarily can cover a lot of ground.
Can I ask you a question about how you felt about particular part of our regulations? So we have this section because we're a beach area and we have lots of non-conforming in beach area. And the zoning board of appeals used to be heavily burdened for every single thing that was done because all the places were non-conforming and they were the commission of choice, and they just got completely overloaded. So we adopted this section, I'm sure you encountered it, that allowed them to come in under certain standards.
Mhm.
And even on a non-conforming use, they could do certain things. Did you remember that encountering that in regulations? Because we've had more problems with that.
Which, you know, these are fairly lengthy regulations to give you an idea of what Paul and Eric and I worked through. I flagged 516 items in the regs that we reviewed together. And so that's one of 516. But do you recall the exact section that is?
13 point something or other,
Oh, let me,
but it's just one that is.
well, there's also the whole issue about 931 and 913 and, okay,
Yeah, maybe it's that.
let's go to
Was
that.
that the no of the
Yeah,
variance
13
section?
is the special, site.
Let's go to 9.
It's 9, yeah, that's right.
Okay, exceptions to 9132.
Yeah.
The commission may issue a special permit for an enlargement, extension, or additional building, otherwise prohibited in the section in the R10 district with the FEMA zone there. And what's happening is it's still mostly going to ZBA on this. It's not really coming to you for a special
What
exception.
happened is we thought we had a special exception that would not allow the variance because now we have a regulation that permitted something. And they just dodged the regulation that permits it and go and ask for a variance anyway. So there's something very bothersome about it. And then after they get their variances, they come back and apply under the same reg and say, you gotta approve us now. And so we have our discretion is completely.
Well, except even if there is a variance, the variance only allows them to apply for the special permit, doesn't obligate you to grant the special permit. That said, and we'll probably get to this in phase 2, if you have a district where every single lot is non-conforming, I think there is a problem with that district. If R10 really isn't R10, it's really R5 or whatever it really is, maybe we need to go back and revisit what it means to be R10. Because again, if every single lot in the R10 district has less than 10,000 square feet, something is inherently wrong with how you're regulating that zone. So
This was all about sewers, you understand?
I understand all of that, but I mean, ultimately, we shouldn't be zoning by ZBA approval for a whole bunch of reasons. But if everybody is non-conforming, then that defeats what it means to be a uniform zone. And it also means that basically people are moving around the zoning regulations by wealth. If you have the money to get a variance, you can get a variance. If you don't, you're stuck with what the regs allow you to do. And I find that inherently a difficult thing to wrap my head around.
So I would appreciate it when we get to that, but this is something that, since you sound like you have a lot of expertise, that I think we stepped into a cow pie when we did it, because we thought we were being nice. But it definitely has.
Well, and this also got the whole issue of when we waded into seasonal versus year round, it got the commission to a lot of trouble. So I mean, there's a lot of things that are tied to south of Shore Road that are going to need to be reviewed. I just don't think this version is the section is time to do that. I think that's.
No, I understand, but I just thought I would ask him whether he hit it and went, oh my God, what do these people do?
And I pulled it off, that section open now, and so I do recall this section. I do recall flagging it as, I think I flagged it as phase 2 item to follow up on. We carried it over basically verbatim to new regulations because it needs some attention, needs work, and we don't want to get under the hood of it now and start changing it. So it's all there. It's now in section 4.2.3, item B. It's called exceptions to general rule by special permit by the commission. Well, same title as the existing section. Okay, it's all there. And Eric made a really good point about non-conforming lots, and if you have a district that has a high percentage, and this is something that I see quite a bit in zoning districts in a lot of different communities, we'll typically do a little simple GIS analysis to map out the number of parcels or show them on the map that are non-conforming with the minimum lot size. It's a little more difficult to do that for setbacks and that sort of thing, but minimum lot size is very easy to do that exercise for. And sometimes we'll see 40% of lots are non-conforming with lot size, which is
Beach area.
or and more than that
I would
sometimes.
say it's closer to 80%.
Yeah,
more.
Yeah, and that it's very problematic, and it's not, the simple solution is obviously just to reduce down to a number that brings 90+% into conformity. Technically that's simple. Procedurally, that's very difficult because people are very sensitive about changes to their zoning district. And then all of a sudden they become very concerned that one empty lot is going to be now subdivided and there's going to be 3 houses on it instead of 1 because
There's a lot of interaction between homeowners too.
Yeah.
Even when they get a little shed or something and they place it. So those lots are so small.
yeah, there's some
now
friction.
Interaction between property owners and the ocean, and wanting to see it ends up being, or I think the reason why the commission keeps hanging on, because you're trying to protect one owner against another, really.
The other thing that I think will need to get looked at, particularly on West End Drive, is you've got these properties across the street that have garages and just garages on them. But they're theoretically, according to our assessor and according to land records, a separate lot. And I don't want them turned into houses. I don't really want them treated as a building lot. But is there a way to draft the regs so that these lots across the street are irrevocably tied to the properties that they are sold with, and you can use them for the accessory purpose without the primary purpose? Because right now, if you have an empty lot across the street and you want to put a garage there, the answer is no, you can't, because that's an accessory use without a primary use. But then they're like, well, do I put a house there? I'm like, no, I don't want you to put a house there either. So, you have these lots that you can't theoretically do anything with.
Can they get a variance to get a garage or not?
They can, but then they have to demonstrate uniqueness. And, you know, again, it puts the burden on them to then have the money and wherewithal to get the variance. So again, it's sort of wealth-based zoning, which is not how I see the regs working most fairly for people.
Of course. I think you'd be hard pressed to get them to combine it as a single lot.
Well, because there's a
They can't
street in
be.
between.
There's a road, a public.
Yeah, no, but I mean, yeah, exactly. So
So,
how
yeah, I
do you
mean,
accomplish that goal then?
The Water Division of Connecticut has, you know, when they have a septic system that's on somebody else's property, because that's the only way it can be done, or a well or water supply, they just make them be restricted in the land records,
well, yeah, and
tied.
that's,
You can't be untied.
and again, I'm not sure that it's possible to do through the regs or whether it has to be done some other way, but that's, again, I had a question about that today, where,
Yeah.
what do we do with these stray lots that are across the street? Now, maybe in 5 years when all of that is underwater, it's not gonna matter, but, until then,
Less than that.
It's
They're
not
gone.
them for doing anything.
so, anyway, so something to consider for later. So let's go back to tonight's issues.
I've flagged it.
At the end.
We are, and so, but Eric brought up a very point, or at least it came up in discussion about variances and ZBA's authority. Connecticut statute really only authorizes zoning board of appeals to issue variances based upon hardships, as Eric was describing, something unique to the property, special condition. Use variances are not permitted, right? If you strictly apply the authority that's granted to the ZBA by statute. You do have a section, and fortunately, as I understand it, your ZBA is pretty good about not handing out use variances, and it's not like that everywhere. But you did have a section, a full section of the regs currently that regulates how use variances are to be issued and under what conditions. And they shouldn't be issued at all. We removed that section, and it's documented in the table of sections eliminated. We removed the whole section that describes how ZBA is to hand out use variances, which they shouldn't be handing out.
Is that a legal thing that they're not allowed to do out, or is it just a
I thought it was an
practice?
option whether towns.
Because it's in there to begin with.
Where they came from is if there were lots that if you didn't allow the use variance, you were essentially confiscating the use of that land, the use variance would be allowed. Realistically, it's almost impossible to demonstrate that your lot has no other possible use besides that use variance. So that's the challenge. I mean, and so far, again, the time I've been here, from what I've seen, we haven't been lawyer for zoning previously. I haven't seen anyone try and use the use variance argument in front of the ZBA, or at least not successfully. So I'm not sure we're losing much by removing that section from the regs, but it is a discussion we can certainly have. They are, I mean, in any sort of reasonable interpretation of the statutes, they are incredibly rare situations. So, you know, even more, you know, rare than the standard variances, which should be theoretically rare or not. Use variances, you know, should be basically just a handful ever given anywhere. So even if you lose that section of your regs, I don't think you're really, in any practical sense, losing land uses here in the town of Old Lyme. Because again, the argument has to be, unless you allow me to give this particular property, this particular use, there is literally no other possible use for the land.
I mean, I could honestly see that though, in some scenario,
Mhm.
that's just me, because I look at land use differently, right? But I understand what you're saying. It's not a precedent that's been set.
Then they come to zoning, is that's what the upshot is, they come to zoning, not to the ZBA.
Yeah, and then the regulations to include the use.
You know, and again, that's how the waterfront district got in there,
Yeah.
because someone said, oh, in this area, the only real use is
Correct.
waterfront. And therefore it shouldn't be residential, it should be this, and that's why we have that particular district in just a very few places in town.
Yep.
Where that's the only real possible use. So, If it really comes up that way, then we can certainly revisit the issue.
I don't need to spend any more time on it. It was just,
Yeah.
she brought it up and I found it.
It, I brought it to your attention, because I think it's very important to point out that we're pulling this section out and we're carrying it into the new organization. Simply because it's very clear that it's outside ZBA's authority to hand out use variances. Therefore, you shouldn't have conditions by which they are to be handed out. It should be a hardship driven, which it may end up, it could, if a hardship is demonstrated, it could potentially result in a use being varied, right? In a use that's not currently allowed being allowed. So there could be a use implication, but hardship needs to be demonstrated. And so that's what we removed. Anything that just suggests that you can just come in and ask for a different type of use because it's convenient to you.
I change the subject for a second.
Sure.
District standard tables. I love the tables, but I think I gave Eric at our last meeting what I thought were some typos. Unless I was
Okay.
reading it wrong.
Yeah, let's,
So what? I'm sorry.
Typos?
yeah, let's get to it.
That didn't get transposed properly. We talked
Yeah,
about
it was,
that.
it was transposition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Was there anything else that you see in the tables as they're now organized that jumps out at
I
you?
still think there were some under the LI80 and Soundview that, unless I'm reading it wrong, need to be revisited.
Okay. Can you point me to any specific standard or unit of measurement?
LI80,
Yeah.
row 3, wetlands, watercourse restrictions.
Joe, I'm gonna literally go up and get the sheet you gave me. I'm gonna give to him now. So that way, unless
Oh,
you.
good.
That's the old one.
That's the old
That's
piece.
I don't know if that's fine, but just so you know, as an example, LI80, it says 2.5 and it should be 50%.
Okay.
I mean, it
That's-
was that sort of thing.
Yes, that's
Okay.
clearly not correct. Everything, there should be a percentage there. Okay,
Yeah,
I
so
got
I
it.
saw that in LI80 and
Yep.
in Soundview, there was some, and that might be right, but
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's clearly in there. Thank you for flagging it. Was there anything else that concerned you in that table?
Just that the numbers were wrong. There was a few. Yeah.
Well, okay, we'll
He's
double
got
check
the
them.
table.
Okay, good.
He's run up to get the
Yeah.
table, so.
Okay.
But were there anything additionally in those that isn't, was just that one that's not incorporated into that?
No, there were several.
Okay,
There were several.
so is that a second sheet we should capture from you?
Well, this is in the version dated 6/2.
Okay,
There were still some errors. The one he went to get
Mhm.
is like a May.
Oh, the prior, okay.
Okay.
Well,
I
that,
think it's just someone that's just got to really,
okay. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll go through it again. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
that's the
Okay.
beautiful thing, yeah.
This is, you can,
Very good. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Right. Okay. Thank you for reviewing that. I've gotten through my lists. Are there any questions or comments?
I like the formatting. I don't know,
Okay.
I did type that over to Eric sometime. I think it reads just formatting wise much more, it's modern, it's legible, kind of, it flows. Without looking at content, I liked it. I liked how
Okay.
it made sense to me, especially working on a computer. It makes sense too. I thought it was easier. I really like things in tables.
Mhm.
So that it's very nice. So I
that you, the
appreciate-
use table, the uses by zones is amazing, just to kind of go right across. I mean, we've had to go, like what's here, what's there, and it's right there, just.
well, I think the deletion, so the duplicative that under the LI80 versus the LI40, you've got all the same stuff listed again and again and again, and you sort of, again, you lose sense of what's different because it's all just listed over and over again. So I think in shaping it this way, you're more easily able to see what's different between the zones.
And there was duplication even in the tables we did have that I noticed you guys combined and made sense of. So I found that very helpful. Thank you.
So how do we want to proceed from here as far as the commission, as far as reviewing the latest update and getting back with?
I mean, personally, I feel like, I know Denise said she'd like to see it wrapped up in a meeting or two. I don't know if 1 or 2 meetings
Okay,
is enough time.
so are we, good?
Well, I guess, is it worth at some point in the next month or two scheduling some special meetings to work on this additionally? So we're not sucking up an entire regular meeting, just doing this as well. At the moment, we don't really have much in the way of applications, so at the moment, we can do it during the regular sessions. But I don't know, again, if people want to take an additional meeting a month to work on this, or whether they would just want to do it one meeting a month, or what is the sense of, sort of work progress that people want to make on this?
Well, now that we have the one with the red in it, instead of trying to read everything and trying to figure out what has changed,
Mhm.
I think we'll all be able to go through it much better.
So we should just pick this up again in a month?
Pick it up again in a month, and then we can decide if there's a lot of complaining on around the table, then we can decide whether we need to do any more special meetings.
Okay. Do you want Mr. Gomes present either in person or on a video screen in a month, or do you think we're going to be able to work on this in his absence, or how do you, what is it, your
I
thoughts?
think in his absence, I think because we can make up sheets like he did.
Okay,
I don't think you need to keep coming in.
Yeah, I like
Section
I like
that
Mike's
this time.
idea though of saying, let's focus. Because we could say, you want to focus on this, you want to focus on this. I think if we all say, he gave us 2 areas that I think we really need to focus on, and that was the use and the definitions. So if we say we're going to just tackle the use section, so, it's a good chunk of the document. And I think doing that, and then we can pick up the other things. But I think if we know the next meeting, because otherwise we're going to go to the section we all want to look at. So I think if we all know that we're going to talk about the use section, let's do that. And that's what we're going to talk about next time.
But with that in mind, so then we would have a designated time to look at a different section, because I
Yeah.
just don't want to make it so, because my AD will have us jumping all over the place, right? So to your point, to keep us focused, I just want to make sure that there's gonna be additional time after that meeting.
Oh, yeah, no, it's
Yeah, we
there's
can-
multiple meetings.
we can do this as long as it takes, Michael. So,
Okay, that's fine. I just, yeah,
What you're saying is just focus on this
exactly,
area.
which I'm
So
all
that
in
we
favor
know
of.
And then,
I like Mike's ideas. What's the homework? It's like,
Right.
it's like, what do I need to focus on?
so July is going to be,
What's gonna be on the exam?
Yeah, exactly.
so we want to just,
will it be open book?
That's what I need to know.
okay, so again, for July, we're looking
This
at,
is a very similar process,
okay,
right?
use sections, what we're all going to be coming back in July and talking about. Is that pretty much what you think is the case? Okay.
And remember, we don't meet in August unless we want to have a
That would be-
special working meeting.
That might be so.
So we would not do anything as far as official business, except just come in and work on this.
Okay, and at some point, when you folks think you are ready, again, I will need to start shopping this to other boards and commissions in town. I don't know if we're that point yet, but at some point, I want to sort of have the time to be able to go to all the other boards and commissions in town and other people say, this is what we have for a draft. Please get back to us with your thoughts on it.
I don't think we're ready for that yet.
That's fine. And
I
again,
don't know, with
That was my
other
point earlier,
commission
the no
members
members.
or, I think, give us a pass or two.
absolutely. But again, planning will need to give a formal referral, but none of the other boards and commissions
Right.
will. So we don't need to go to them at the same level of finality. We can go to them even with a 90% draft and
How
say,
much time do they need to have turnover?
theoretically, planning has a month.
Because.
But-
If the goal was to have everything done by the election, okay? And if we send everything out, I don't think we're gonna get responses back until after the election, and then those boards and committees may have different members too.
Yeah.
So I think as a goal, we finish everything.
Section
before the
one.
ele-
You're saying the first section.
Phase one.
Phase one.
Let's try to clarify.
That we finish our review of everything with all the changes and edits we want before the election as a goal, but maybe not conclude everything because we haven't sent it out yet for everybody else to review.
Yeah, I mean, DEP has a 65-day turnaround time. I would expect most of the other places that we're going to send it out to, we're going to request 2 months to review it since it's 200 pages long. So I think, again, we just know that from the point we start sending it out to various state and other agencies.
So that's a realistic goal before the election, but to have everything done
And-
and approved by outside agencies and back all that work before the election.
Only if we have a document to work from September. So that, again, if I'm not shipping it out until October, then we're not going to hear back from the state until probably December
The
at that point.
64th day.
But I think if we can, to your point, if all of us here can agree on phase one, regardless of, I mean, the touch-ups may be a touch-up.
Well, again, I mean, phase two is an entire separate heavy lift, so.
It's gonna be a lot of public communication.
Yes, the phase two I envision as being a lot of public outreach and shareholders and stakeholders and everybody else giving their thoughts as to what they think are the issues that need to be addressed in phase two. So phase two will involve a lot of reaching out to the public by me and members of the commission and lots of meetings around town and whatever else to try and make sure that we're listening and hearing what people are saying, so we don't end up where we were with Halls Road with the sense that you haven't been listening to us.
It's almost like a POCD workshop,
Yes,
but like for the zoning regs.
so, okay,
Yeah, and I think just getting the other commissions to know when we send it out to them, phase one versus phase two, because I think the comments will come back as, oh, well, can we tweak this? Can we tweak that? And that's not where we are right now. This is
Right.
just a cleanup piece.
I think, again, I will take it upon myself to be the ambassador to all these various boards and commissions, showing up and saying, here's where we are, yeah, here's what we're looking for.
It might be worth having a workshop on that, so everybody's
Okay.
in one room hearing it once from you.
That's fine. I'll take that under advisement as well, so.
That's a great idea.
So that, because it's when everybody's on the same page, and everybody heard the same thing, really important.
It never happens.
Wow.
You can aspire, you
hears
can
the-
aspire
No one-
towards
I
it.
was gonna say that, no one hears the same, I know what you said, but I heard this.
But what happens is if it's different meetings, then it's like.
Yeah.
well,
Compounds it.
everybody, someone asks a question, then the comment, then.
Okay, I am hearing what you're saying to me, and I will try and, again, sometime, not in August when people aren't gonna be around, it's gonna probably be September, October at this point in time before we're gonna try and do that and have some sort of workshop to make that happen.
Good.
So reiterating what the areas of the document I think would be most productive for you to review. So everything in red, obviously, because we very clearly called those areas out that where we changed the language. I would take a look at, I'd review the table of the eliminated sections. I'd go down that list. And we referred to the section number, its name, the reason why we eliminated it. I'd make sure you understand that and you agree with the reason why we eliminated it. Maybe you make you make a sufficient argument that we need to reintroduce something, like we eliminated the whole section on the planning commission. Because they operate under their own kind of authority and, so we take that, we maintain ZBA, however, because there's a stronger connection there. So I would review the eliminated sections, make sure you agree, or if you have any reservations about anything that we removed, bring it to our attention. We could revisit that. The definitions I mentioned because we added and revised a lot of content, and it's very easy to see because it's all color coded. So you can ignore everything in black because that got carried over verbatim. But everything is blue or red. Blue is added new, was not previously defined. Red, we changed the language on it. Okay.
I have one question about I saw somewhere in the removals section.
Yep.
So where we have the conservation zone within the Connecticut River and then conservation, that you just made it one. Where is there did the Gateway Commission language get translated across all of the conservation zone?
With
No, there's not. There's a difference between.
Which
Conservation
item?
Zone, because the Gateway has 100-foot setback for the tidal wetlands, whereas the rest of the conservation zone has a 50-foot setback from tidal coastal resource setback.
It's the non-conservation zone.
Yeah, we have a separate tidal wetlands section in there, but
Tidal, okay. So maybe I was just mistaken. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, but that's
That's
That's-
actually one of the things I want to clarify. I think it should say gateway.
Well, so
It's not conservation zone, because conservation zone sounds like it could apply other places.
that's my.
I would like that.
Okay, and again, the reason, because we had that conversation,
Yeah,
and
we
the
did.
reason was because we have a separate gateway uh, commission here in town. And there was confusion over what the town's gateway commission is versus what the coast.
I'm not set, yeah, I wasn't talking about a gateway, I was talking about just saying either call it the Gateway Conservation Zone or the Connecticut River Conservation Zone, but I wanted to make it so that it was very specific, whatever the name
Okay.
is.
Because it includes its tributaries, but like, there's, being that Old Line has 5 tidal rivers, 6 tidal rivers that crisscross it. In that definition of the gateway zone, it's the Connecticut River and its tributaries, right? So that can include the Lieutenant River,
And it
the
does.
Black Hawk River, right?
It does.
Okay, so but when you're at the 3 Mile River, the 4 Mile River, or Mile Creek, that's not part of.
That's not in
the
the
Connecticut River
conservation zone.
estuary, right? So that's what I just didn't know if it was a
There's some kind of
blanket.
like 1,000 feet in or something.
Correct.
That but it's a lot of the town.
Absolutely. No, but I just didn't know if those rules for that area, which are more restrictive, have now been applied across the rest of
No,
the
I
zones.
don't think they have.
I just think when you say conservation zone, there's that implication that it could be broader than just.
No,
I like the geographic definition.
Yeah, no, I know that. I just didn't know.
So I think he's.
Again,
Because if you look at the
term
definition, it says
gateway was sort of a loaded term
gateway
here in
is
town,
just
so we need to figure out a way to describe it that isn't gateway per se.
So, Mike, I think you point out to existing section 4.3, right? And we had this in our table of eliminated sections, tidal river protection other than Connecticut River.
Is that?
I think
Yeah,
that's
so-
probably what you're pointing to.
Yeah, I was pointing to,
Okay, so,
in the appendix.
yeah, if you go to
Yeah, it's
page
appendix.
214, section.
Yep, exactly.
Section 4.3, the second row.
Yep.
Okay, so what it says is this section provides it was removed, 4.3. This section provides a summary of the regulations in 4.3.1 through 4.3.3 and is redundant. So what, we didn't remove all of 4.3, we just removed that first paragraph of 4.3. We still have the content of 4.3.1, 4.3.2, 4.3.3. But if you look at it, this paragraph of 4.3 restates everything that's below,
Okay.
but not in exactly the same wording. So it creates confusion as to if this is a separate set of requirements than these. These are the actual, and this is one of your pages 6. These are the actual, this is the meat right here. These are at the actual enforceable standards and regulations. This is kind of an introductory paragraph that summarizes what this says, but because it's separate, it creates a little bit of confusion because the wording's different.
Mhm.
So we didn't get rid of the regulations themselves. We just got rid of this introductory paragraph that was redundant with this and restated it, but restated it differently.
Mhm.
Which, once again, when you say things in a different way twice, it creates a little bit of confusion as to which should prevail because they could be interpreted slightly differently. And that found its way to section 12.2, that content of the new organization. So if you go to, and I'll go to 12.2 now. So you got an idea of how we handle it. Page 79. 12.2, tidal water protection. So 4.3.1 and 4.3.2 are still there. Right, in the conservation zone and then outside the conservation zone, page 79. So we maintain that distinction. Find it there. I'll wait for you to catch
Sorry.
it. Yeah, no problem. All right, so there it is right there. So we maintain the distinction of tidal water
Yep.
protection in the conservation zone and outside the conservation zone. And they are, in fact, as you point out, different standards, which is exactly what 4.3.1 and 4.3.2 do.
Okay.
And we carry that over.
I see the 4.3.2, 4.3.
Yeah, it's organized a little differently. But what the first introductory paragraph that was here, which is really redundant content, which is this part of it that was removed. It reads, except as provided in section 410(3) for the Connecticut River, which is said, so basically the conservation zone, it's got a separate set of regs. Or any tributaries, no building or other structure, including drainage structures, septic systems, wells, shall extend within less than 50 feet of a mean high navigable waters of any tidal watercourse or associated wetlands. And that sentence continues, provided, however, that the zoning commission, in accordance with the provisions of this section 13B, may grant special permit. The sentence keeps going. It's a 1 paragraph long sentence. But if you really get down into it, that is then broken up into pieces. And really what it comes down to is that you have regulations that apply within the conservation zone, the gateway conservation zone, and then outside of it. And so it then follows, in the conservation, no building or other structures, including drainage structures, shall extend within less than 100 feet of the mean high tide. So that's the operative piece. That's the piece that's accepted out of the introductory paragraph. And then the piece that the introductory paragraph is actually describing are areas outside of the conservation zone, where it says, including drainage structure, no building or other structure, including drainage structure, septic systems, or wells, shall extend within less than 50 feet of the high navigable waters of any tidal watercourse or associated tidal wetlands. And so that's the real content that the first paragraph is describing almost in a preview, but then it's exempting out the paragraph that follows, and then it reiterates what it was introducing, which it creates a tremendous amount of confusion when really what's being said is that in the conservation zone, you have this set of standards that applies, and outside of it, you had this set of standards that applies. So we take that whole paragraph, and I guess I could have said it, instead of saying eliminated that, we just reduced it down to 1 sentence. So the introductory paragraph now reads, any structures or site development authorized in this section must demonstrate consistency with the purposes of 4.2 and 4.10.3 and shall comply with the following. And then we get right to it. It can take some time to pull this apart and put it back together in a much cleaner, more elegant way without disrupting what this is trying to do. And we've been very careful to do exactly that.
And we could always just have a table. This is what we do in the tidal rivers and the gateway zone. This is what we do with the tidal rivers in the non-gateway zone.
Where the information leads, really lends itself to a table to better organize it. We try to do that as well.
One thing I just noticed, like in the course of development of waterfront areas, is under the Coastal Management Act, they allow for, protecting water dependent uses and future water dependent use opportunities. And I think that distinction right there is very important, future water dependent use opportunities.
Okay.
Because you can't maintain a future water dependent use if it's underwater. So because the state is telling us we have sea level rise, the Coastal Management Act allows that provision, the future water dependent use opportunities, opens up the opportunity for fill to be placed in tidal waters. So that way you can protect future water dependent use opportunities. And what I'm saying that is that if we have sea level rise, most of the developed land as far as public access facilities are a lot unfilled tidal marshes. So as sea level rise is going, if you don't maintain or fill those specific public access areas, now you won't have any opportunity for future water dependent use because it's underwater. Does that make sense the way I'm explaining?
No, because as the water comes up, then properties further up will have water dependent uses. You don't have to fill to maintain your water dependent use. The water is coming to you, or maybe to your neighbor.
So
We're not gonna solve it.
and we're not going to solve it tonight.
That's a whole different.
I know,
thing.
I completely do. We're talking about existing properties and protecting, right,
Yeah.
their use as water dependent use.
Yeah, they're protecting their use.
What's really going to control the use of that property and any adding to fill or your flood zone
Yeah,
regulations.
that's what I'm saying. The
I mean,
flood
they're going to prevail over any, this is a local protection that you've adopted. The flood zone regulate, that's FEMA, that's federal, and that's going to prevail, and that won't allow.
Allow the filling.
Well, a FEMA will allow for fill in those areas. Absolutely. For water dependent use protection?
Well, it allows for some resiliency, but it won't allow for a flat out blanket elevation of grade that may adversely impact the flood
Others.
profiles in the area.
Yeah, when you're filling in a tidal area, the water is infinite, right? So you can't control the amount of ocean that's coming.
Right.
So anyway.
And so I don't claim to be a resiliency expert, but I know our flood regulations would prevail in those instances, and really filling of any property would have to be compliant with FEMA's flood zone standards, and with your flood zone regulations, which are also regulated by DEEP as well.
Yeah,
And the Coastal Management Act.
Yeah, that's where this falls under the coastal.
Yeah,
Management.
Guys, it's 9:30. We had a
Yes.
hard stop at 10 o'clock. So if we're going to finish the rest of our business, I think we're probably going to need to leave this here for tonight at this point, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate your patience with the process. And I appreciate all your input this evening, and it's absolutely necessary as part of this process. So
It
thank
is.
you.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well,
Appreciate it.
you're welcome.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mike. All right.
So we have one more item to discuss that we reversed. Discussion and vote on fees for applications before the
Nice meeting you.
before the zoning commission.
Okay, you guys should have been emailed, and we have more copies tonight. This from Craig here, the overview discussing how we sort of came up with kind of different language or two different alternatives. Suggestion 1, suggestion 2. Again, I have multiple copies of this if you need another copy of this.
Yeah.
Okay, Jane, in the box behind you, I guess, is a ZEO.
I left mine at my desk at home, so I will take one, please.
Do you want comments on what you provided us?
Yes, well, that's why we're here to talk about it.
Okay.
But I just make sure everybody's looking at the same document before we. Okay,
I was just wondering, do you want that here? Do you want us to email them to
well,
you?
no, I mean,
You know.
okay, I think, Mike,
Thank you.
you said you wanted.
Yeah,
one? Okay,
please. I just forgot my copy.
and Michael Barnes says he needs one if you have an extra in there.
So are we talking about the regulations
So we're talking
or
about,
this, or
His
Oh,
document that,
okay.
or that we received.
so. By all means, at this point, we're looking for comments and thoughts and whatever else. I mean, ideally, we want to come up with a policy when we're ready. So this is our thoughts as to how we came up with our language. But ultimately, it's your regs and your language, so you've got to be comfortable with it. So if you have questions, changes, whatever you need to do, that's why it's on the agenda. So.
I do have some questions. Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
Just a quick one. I think the nature and intensity clause is a Rorschach test, and you should just go to at the sole discretion.
Okay,
Say that one more time.
The trigger for the fees for engaging expertise, engineering or technical expertise is tied to the nature and intensity of the project, which is
I like that idea.
pretty subjective. I would just say at the sole discretion and allow discussion of it with the applicant and the ability to withdraw the application if they are not satisfied with it. It just seems to me to be really subjective and open the door to arguments.
If we are having to have them pay for separate professional advice.
Yeah.
Correct, because like they hired a professional to do their site plan, and now we're paying, they have to pay another professional to review the work that their professional did.
Yeah, and I would say the trigger for that just have it be simply at the sole discretion of the commission to engage that
As
service.
opposed to a blanket,
As,
as opposed to making every applicant have to pay for that review.
no,
No.
no, if at the sole discretion, the commission engages.
No, I understand that.
Expert, then the applicant would be,
That word in there is if there's a real standard, it's all illusory, just leave it at the discretion of the commission.
Okay.
It's gonna be illusory anyway.
yeah, what does intensity mean?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. That's my concern, what that I had with paying third-party fees to a third-party engineering company who may have lost the bid on bidding on the project that they was before them. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but like.
So in essence, it's to simplify it.
So you could just say the commission may require additional technical assistance and just leave the front part of that sentence off. Right?
Yeah, that was what I had said last time, definitely.
What did you guys think about, I appreciated, Eric, that you pulled some examples of the towns in our area use, and there's something to be said for Lyme, because it's unbelievably.
Absolutely.
It's just kind of like, we might need to do this, and just leaves the door open for it. I don't know what you guys thought about less is more. Deep River is a similar kind of thing. Yeah.
Did we ever do this? I mean, the application says we may, our current application says we may. Did
And
we?
going back about 20 years, it looks like, yes, you did, but it got abandoned at some point in time.
Okay.
Deep River, how you know, is in the process of changing their definition. It's not working.
Oh, it's not, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Charging the fees isn't working?
They gotta charge more.
Are you the town attorney?
Oh, so just,
That's how it's been.
That's what I thought, okay.
but just the actual fee number, but not having just the actual quantity, not the actual.
The whole thing is being changed to make it much longer. couple of paragraphs.
Because having it short doesn't work.
No,
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
because applicants want to know why, what, they want to know, try to predict.
Yeah.
So the more information is actually.
You're right, because it can be expensive for applicants. It's already expensive for applicants. And to your point before, Eric, about the CDA and having to have the bank account to be able to finance the right attorney, the right land use consultant to make that determination. This is just another expensive.
So as you guys are working on that, Jane, like where is that to Mike's point though, also, like where is that fine line between
You
being
can't,
too specific and being too,
well, this one is specific, the recommended one.
I see what you're saying.
It's
So just
saying the
the
kinds of
change
things
Mm.
that they might have to pay for.
Okay,
It's not really saying whether they're going to have to pay for it, because that's gonna be the commission's decision, and these are just things I don't think it's possible to write anything that was useful.
that's gonna cover everything, yeah, yeah,
It's just better to say, these are the kinds of things,
right.
and, could have warned them. And I imagine that they probably know a little bit already about the kinds of things they're submitting and not giving us enough information on,
Mhm.
so.
Okay, and again, there's two different suggestions, 1 and 2 there. I don't know if people like the bullet points better than the paragraph or vice versa.
I like the bullets,
the
but I like
bullets
some of,
better than narrative.
I like some of the stuff in the second one added as bullets to the.
Well, then by all means, if you want to send me that along, I'm happy to work on that as well. I
To
mean,
do it. Some of the stuff like you have are encouraged, like PDF electronic versions of documents are encouraged. Do you want them? Because if.
yes, we definitely want.
I would say are
Required.
required, yeah,
Then make that change. We'll say that
Required.
all required.
yeah. When people send their certified mail out to their abutters, who verifies that?
Well, that's what the certificate of mailing is all
Yeah,
about,
but
right?
who verifies that they did it to all the people? Do you go through and check that they did it?
We almost invariably, we're the ones providing the abutters list, and we're the ones then, okay.
So you're assuming, okay, and then you get the verification.
Then we get the verification based on certificate of mailing. We compare the abutters list to certificate of mailing. But it's a rare person who generates their own abutters list. Almost invariably, it's Craig or Fallon who's generating that abutters list and saying, this is it, mail to these people. And then we get it back and we look and we say, okay, yes, you did it. Okay.
Yep.
The publication to the day, I thought there was something that was changing that was going to modify the ability of having to put in the day as opposed to some other sort of notification.
That didn't get passed by the
Did
legislature.
not, okay,
So
it's still the day.
it is, well, it is the newspaper of record, and we only have one newspaper of record at this point in time. If you want to create your own newspaper of record,
I don't understand. So a newspaper record is in print.
Yes. Has to be in print and it has to be available to a percentage of the population. Now, they don't actually have to get it. I mean, we just had this case from Fenwick where even though basically nobody in Fenwick was getting the paper, it was available to them and therefore it was considered to be, legal notice.
Yep.
Because again, in the wintertime in Fenwick, there was nobody living there. There was no one getting the paper. But if the Middletown Press was available, then it was a paper of record.
Is there a way to add an additional requirement? Or is the
Well-
threshold from the state set the standard?
Well, you can always have more notice.
Well, what I'm getting at is like, for instance, with Kathy Clark Vat House, if she didn't read the day newspaper on the day that her land was being rezoned, she didn't know, right?
So
So I'm just using that as an example. Is there another way of
we
communication?
put it on our own web page, right? And we require for public hearings, notice to neighbors, right? Clinton requires you put a sign in front of your house. We could require that, but so up until now, we haven't required that because that's one more additional expense on applicants.
So I think this sign, when it comes down to like zoning property change or so, like zoning boundary changes.
Well, zoning boundary changes are even harder, because those don't necessarily run along property.
Yeah.
So, in cases of variances or special permits, if you want to make a sign requirement, we can do that.
I'm more concerned about the town's ability to notify the citizens of its changes of its regulations. That's kind of where I'm going.
Again, at the moment, the web page is probably the best way to handle that. I don't know any other way to get that out. You can, if you are interested, put in a request that you be notified of any application on a particular piece of property. And then if there's an application that comes in, you will be notified regarding that particular piece of property. That puts the burden on the property neighbor or whatever it is to come to us with a FOIA request to do that.
Is there any trigger to make the town have to notify its citizens of changes besides that? I don't know if anyone has a desire to have that or not. I don't know if you see what my concern is or not.
I mean, ultimately, beyond the statutory requirement for legal notice and beyond the statutory requirement that we have an agenda on the webpage and those things,
Yeah.
there's no other requirement that we have. Again, when we came to, like, for instance, Halls Road,
Yeah.
each time Halls Road came for public hearing, they sent out 50, 60, 70 notices to abutters because anyone within a certain radius had to get those notices.
Yeah.
So, and in Westbrook, and hopefully at some point in the line, in Westbrook, I went through the process of regularizing the lot lines to the zone lines because there were a lot of instances like you have here where they were just X number of feet off the center line.
Correct, yeah.
So we sent out 400 or something notices that we were aligning property line and zone line.
That's a good call.
Just had to make that, you bite the bullet and do that. And it took a week's worth of just digging through and figuring out what was going to happen on that. At some point, I'd like to do that here. That's going to take backseat to what we're working on now. But yes, in the event that we are rewriting a zone line, we will have to give anybody within a certain radius notice of what we're doing on that.
In writing.
In writing, by certificate of mailing.
That's
Okay.
right. So that's what I want to clarify. Sorry for the drawn out.
So that means that the scenario you're saying could happen.
Well, no, we would not change someone's zone without their being notified in writing by certificate of mailing.
But that wasn't the way it was with the last, so like in 2007, when they
No, I
rezoned.
get that one specific case that could happen. now.
I don't know, that's
That
why I
will
was
not
trying to
happen
clarify.
now.
That's what I'm saying.
What does this have to do with this?
What's this public notice requirement? This has nothing to do with the
No.
fees. This has to do with the public notice requirement separate for that.
How did we get on that?
So I asked the question. of it.
Oh, okay, so let's
Can I
go.
ask a question on the second bullet under fees you had? Expenses incurred for such assistance will be actual cost and must be reimbursed by the applicant before a final decision. That hit me as like a bribe. I mean, I know it isn't, but it was like your application is under decision, but be sure and pay up before you get, could we, I mean, I think those estimates should be paid before it gets.
Okay, I guess the point being is the timetables in the statute are not gonna move. The only remedy you have if someone doesn't pay the fees is to deem the application incomplete and deny it. So I can't stop them from submitting an application. I can't stop them from requiring a public hearing on an application. The only hard, firm deadline we have is decision. And if when you reach the decision and they haven't paid the fee, at that point, you have to say the application is incomplete and denied. That's the only remedy we have. So I'm not sure you like that necessarily, but I don't know what else to do with that.
Best, because you really don't know sometimes what we're gonna do any earlier.
I mean,
Well, I mean, they had some examples of estimates.
and what Old Saybrook does,
Engineer, that's
Yeah.
$3,300 near the end of the whole thing.
like $5,000, but yeah.
You said it's 3,000.
I mean,
Yeah.
we don't, well, you'd have to go out and get an estimate. It would slow up the upfront process for sure.
Yeah, when you get an Old Saybrook across the river, literally when you submit the application, the first thing that happens is they send it out to in Jacobson. Jacobson gives a fee estimate. And before they set the public hearing.
Yeah.
You pay 150% of the fee estimate.
Yeah.
And that's
crazy.
That's a very expensive way to go. And if you want to go that way, you can. But that just, it changes the nature of the application process.
Absolutely. But I mean, I think that's why we're looking at this
That-
too.
that-
And,
again,
you know, I'm not
that's a
saying
policy
that's
call.
the right way, but it does sound to me like it just hits me. It's a little bit that, you know, oh, we paid our fee and you still denied us. That's how I read this.
I understand that. I understand the policy of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it sounds extortionate to say, pay up or we deny you. But I don't know that,
What about the balance is a condition of approval or condition of, that has to be paid within a certain amount of time?
or what
Or what? What's your
penalty, at
enforcement?
that point, we have to I issue a cease and desist order and we start enforcement over that.
So
I'm
I
not-
like your-
I'm not sure the judge is necessarily gonna let us void a special permit because they haven't paid the fee at that point in time. I think you're much stronger denying the application is incomplete, saying you haven't, a condition of completeness is you've paid the fee and you haven't paid the fee.
So we either look like extortionists or we don't have a remedy.
That's it.
And
It's,
the town's out the
it's a
money.
tricky one. I
The
think it's
town is
tricky.
out the money, that's for real.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
Right. That's
So can we go forward and say suggestion one is the approved
Yes.
suggestion?
Okay,
Yeah, like that.
That the PDF version shall be sent to the town, not just encouraged,
Mm.
right? And that when you get down to fees, we don't have the sentence, if an application is determined, or the phrase, if it's determined to have a significant site or neighborhood impact, we just start with the commission may require additional technical assistance.
Hmm.
And leave that there. And I don't think there's any other changes. Does anybody else have a change that they wanted?
But when you say that additional technical assistance may be required, do we add to that the applicant will be responsible?
That's the next.
That's not
bullet
bullet.
point.
That's not understanding.
Oh, that's the extortion one, yeah. okay.
Well, I like that it's at least actual cost, not actual cost plus 50%. Because I think that's a little.
Yeah, no, I think that, I agree with that too, but it's
Yeah.
just the way it's worded, or maybe we
Okay.
can think of some nicer verbiage.
All right, so everybody happy with that? Those two changes to
Oh,
suggestion
I had
one?
one other thought. The PDF versions were saying required. Do you want to use Craig's email or do you want to use a generic email? I hope Craig stays here forever, but just so you,
well, I mean, the policy can always be updated to, I mean, we don't have a generic box at the moment.
okay.
I mean, like the fire marshal, it just has fire marshal at, and maybe at some point we need to change Craig's to a generic box. You know, when I was in North Branford, my email was town planner at, so I can
Like
certainly,
selectman's office
Yeah.
or, yeah, so something to think about.
but that will require
Well,
talking
mention
to.
that to Tom. We'll get all stressed out. He does not like adding additional email.
Well, no, it would be replacing it would be, over the long term, it would be easier for him because he would never have to add another email again.
Yeah, true.
Because whoever was in Craig's position would just have that
Right.
email account. So,
No, I like,
And would you ever want to put in your process that there's pre-application meetings?
well, they are already in the regs. You can have a pre-application
Yeah,
meeting, but
did you want that as part of one of your bullets? As part of the process, if they care to.
um,
I'll put it in my little box for you to think about.
Okay.
Also.
sounds good.
So did you get the two changes?
I did get 2 changes and
I'm ready to, make a motion for the benefit of our moving this meeting along, that we accept suggestion number 1 with the, 2 changes.
Okay, is there a second?
Also,
Wake up, everybody.
yeah, we're at 9:50.
so
So
I guess, Mary Jo, did you want to make another change here? Is that
Well,
was,
Eric had asked for my suggestions. So are we saying just, we're going to definitely do these 2, but we might modify it some more?
look, as I say for any of these,
We've got a motion and a second. How about discussion? Okay,
I guess what I will say, Mary Jo, is like anything else in land use, it's permanent until it's not. So if you want to come back next month and with suggestions, we can always modify it again next month.
Well, I'll send you, I won't send you my suggestions. If this is our motion and this is what we're happy with, then I won't send them to you. I mean,
well, wait a minute, do we want to incorporate your, no, we
Well,
can't.
his answer was that he already has, it's already in the reg.
Well, but
He
he's,
gave you an answer.
okay, but again,
Not like
if you have
filling up.
other thoughts about how to modify it, we can always modify it again later, Mary Jo. So I would encourage you, if you have other thoughts, send them along. And again, if we need to modify it later, we can. Let's adopt this for tonight. And then
Put it on the
and
agenda
then we
for
will,
next
we
month.
will address it again later, but at least we have something on the books going forward.
Fine.
Okay,
Okay,
More discussion? Where everybody falls asleep.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes 500. Okay, one more thing. Approval of the May meeting minutes.
motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jane Marsh. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Approval of minutes for May 2025 approved 500. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
So moved by Denise, second,
I'll second.
Michael Miller, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.
this, you're gonna have to stop
Sorry,
this.
didn't say before you came.
We didn't catch
Oh.
already.
But I